Chapter 559. To some extent, before Wang Tianzong officially broke through, Li Tianlan could be said to be the person who knew the combat power of the Chosen One best. His sword intent was already in the most perfect state. Simulating the sword energy with sword intent, he could totally imagine how powerful the Chosen One's sword was. Because of this, he was so scared when facing Wang Tianzong, who was about to break through. The suffocating pressure was like a shadow covering the whole sky. There was no light, only the deepest darkness and majesty. In this state, Wang Tianzong's every move made him extremely nervous. Li Tianlan had long known that the master of Samsara Palace had a sword move. That was the strongest trump card of the Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan had also estimated the power of this sword move, and the conclusion was very clear. The power of this sword move should be roughly between the peak of the Invincible Realm and the half-step Supreme Master. Only in this way could the whole dark world be afraid. But he did not expect that he still underestimated this sword move. The strongest trump card of the master of Samsara Palace was the Chosen One's sword move, and it was the Chosen One who was in the peak state. The power of this sword move had almost exceeded the limit of Li Tianlan's imagination. No matter how amazing the power of the void divine weapon emitting colorful light was, no matter how amazing the sword formation created by the Chosen One was, the master of Samsara Palace had to pay a price for this sword move. Putting Wang Tianzong aside, you certainly can't bear this sword move. Li Tianlan looked into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace and said seriously. The master of Samsara Palace was also looking at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were calm and tranquil. After a long time, a faint smile bloomed on her soft face. You care about me? I said you can't bear this sword move. Li Tianlan did not know why he suddenly became extremely agitated. He could not tell where this feeling came from, but the instinct that was close to intuition kept reminding him that he could not let the master of Samsara Palace use this sword move. Otherwise he was likely to regret it for the rest of his life. The increasingly clear intuition was almost roaring non-stop, occupying all of Li Tianlan's consciousness. His heart was beating wildly, and the worry and fear in his subconscious completely surged out, so much so that he forgot to respect the master of Samsara Palace. I can't bear it, neither can Wang Tianzong. The master of Samsara Palace looked at Li Tianlan and said in a soft voice, there are many results after this sword move. The best result is that Wang Tianzong and I die together. The worst result is that I die and Wang Tianzong is seriously injured. But even the worst result is good enough for you. Her voice was steady and soft. In fact, Li Tianlan was wrong. He was not the only one who knew about the heavenly suns. In other words, in this era where no one had ever seen a heavenly sun, only the master of Samsara Palace had seen the power that could change the color of heaven and earth. She might not know Wang Tianzong, but it didn't matter. Wang Tianzong could definitely break through. It didn't matter. Because in any case he firmly believed that the Chosen One she met could not be stronger than Wang Tianzong after the breakthrough. But after the breakthrough, Wang Tianzong could not be stronger than the real Chosen One she had met. The two sides were evenly matched. She was confident that she could truly replicate that pinnacle sword. Therefore, whether the result was the best or the worst, it was actually not bad. She did not care about life and death. What did it matter to her? This is not what I want, Li Tianlan said. He suddenly felt a little powerless. He was very clear about the consequences of all this. Everything was in the open. If he became the Chosen One, there was no way for him to let anyone replicate his sword unscathed. The Chosen One represented absolute majesty, absolute supremacy, and absolute supremacy. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Dominance over others. How could such a sword be replicated? Even with so many conditions, the master of Samsara Palace had to pay the price. But this is what you want, Qin Weibai said softly. The emotions in her eyes changed, and the crystal light was like the twinkling starry sky. Why? Li Tianlan asked. Qin Weibai wanted to say something. Li Tianlan suddenly glanced at her and shook his head. He looked straight at the master of Samsara Palace and asked, why? It has something to do with you and it has nothing to do with you. The master of Samsara Palace laughed softly. Her eyes became softer but with a little stubbornness and sadness. The biggest reason is that I want to give myself an ending. Do you like this ending? Li Tianlan sneered, but panic and coldness kept spreading in his body. His breathing was a little shaky. You still don't understand. It's not a matter of whether I like it or not, but the ending should be like this. My fate is like this. The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He was grateful to the master of Samsara Palace and respected her. But to put it bluntly, they were not familiar with each other. Today was the first time they met officially. He did not know why his emotions were so violent. He closed his eyes. After a long time he said coldly, "I don't believe in destiny." There seemed to be some emotions in the master of Samsara Palace's soft eyes for a moment, and they became dazed and desperate. The room fell silent for a moment. Li Tianlan forced himself to calm down. After a while he said softly, "I need to know the reason why the Samsara Palace desperately fought against Wang Tianzong. You just said that people in high positions can't talk about life and death easily." "I did say that," the master of Samsara Palace said softly, "but if there is no Samsara Palace, I will naturally not be in a high position. The Samsara Palace has actually done everything it can do by existing to this day. Next, there is no need for it to exist. When things in Eastern Europe are over, Little Bai will go back to Tianan with you. All the preparations have been made there. It will be your real sky. With Little Bai helping you, I can rest assured." Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the master of Samsara Palace in silence. "The chaos in Eastern Europe was caused by the Samsara Palace, so I have always been able to grasp the general direction of the chaos. Tianlan, now you have done everything you should do. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough is not what you should care about. The final battle is also not your business. All grievances will be settled in the final battle. As for the future, it will be a new era. Isn't that good? No matter how good the era is, if you can't see it, what's the point for you?" Li Tianlan said coldly. "I don't deserve to see the era that is too good." The master of Samsara Palace smiled brightly but a little sadly. "So you are going to die?" Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace and laughed at himself. "And you are going to die for me? What's the reason?" The master of Samsara Palace was silent for a while, then slowly said, "The reason? Just take it that I owe you and pay you back." "You don't owe me anything." All the negative emotions in Li Tianlan's heart broke out completely, and his voice was cold. "Before today you were just a name I heard from others. We didn't even meet. What can you owe me? Do you still remember Dongqing Huangtu?" The master of Samsara Palace suddenly asked. Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. Of course he remembered Dongqing Huangtu. In fact, out of some curiosity he had been looking for clues about Dongqing Huangtu, but all the clues he got pointed to one problem. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." "I remember," he said, "but this person doesn't exist at all and he shouldn't exist. If he really doesn't exist, how can there be you?" The master of Samsara Palace's voice was fleeting, but in Li Tianlan's ears, it was like a clap of thunder. Li Tianlan's face suddenly turned pale. He gritted his teeth and said, "What do you mean?" "Nothing." The master of Samsara Palace said softly, "It's just that for me what has existed can't be denied. He is the chosen one, so he naturally existed." Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had been silent. Her perfect and delicate face seemed to be transparent in the light. He remembered that Qin Weibai had talked about Dongqing Huangtu for the first time that day. He was besieged by several invincible realm experts, interfered by countless thundershocking realm experts, and drowned by murderous weapons and a sea of people at the same time. Corpses were everywhere and blood flowed like a river. He was besieged to death by 6 invincible realm experts? Li Tianlan asked. To be exact, there were 3 murderous weapons and 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm. One of them could barely be regarded as the chosen one, but his state was damaged. The master of Samsara Palace said. Even Li Tianlan, who thought he knew the chosen one very well, was speechless for a long time at this time. 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Not to mention that one of them was a chosen one in an incomplete state. Even if there were only 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm, they could sweep everything in this era. Now in the whole dark world, there were no more than 7 experts at the peak of the invincible realm that could be confirmed. Not to mention 3 murderous weapons and a sea of people. The most important thing was that he still remembered what Qin Weibai had said. In such a siege, Dongqing Huangtu died in a sneak attack. At that time he still hadn't used his sword. That was a sneak attack from the woman he loved deeply and also loved deeply. If it hadn't been for that sword, the final result would be hard to say. Every time he heard about it, Li Tianlan felt nothing but shock in his heart. Dongqing Huangtu, is he really dead? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Of course he is dead. The master of Samsara Palace sighed softly. Li Tianlan nodded and said, what does this have to do with me? I can't pay back what I owe him, but I can't watch you continue to struggle in this era. There are some things that are the same to pay back to you. The master of Samsara Palace said blandly. What do you owe him? Li Tianlan was suddenly a little curious. If the master of Samsara Palace was paying back a debt, why would she pay it back to him? A debt that could make a peak of the invincible realm pay with his life? One could imagine how heavy it was. The master of Samsara Palace didn't say anything. Li Tianlan glanced at her and said, "What does Dongqing Huang to have to do with me?" The master of Samsara Palace still didn't say anything. Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had calmed down. At this time she was blinking at him with an innocent face. It was obvious that she didn't know. Li Tianlan thought about it and simply changed the angle. The existence of Dongqing Huangtu was too vague. The clues he had were not enough to directly find out the person who seemed to have a close relationship with him. So he asked directly, "Who killed Dongqing Huangtu back then?" The master of Samsara Palace was silent. It was a long time. In the almost frozen time she finally looked up at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were calm, but her voice seemed to pass through a desert invisibly, becoming extremely hoarse and dry. "Was me." The master of Samsara Palace said, "I killed him." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 560. The candlelight flickered in the darkness. This was an almost spacious hall. The dim light of the candlelight flickered slightly. Where the light converged, a brand new statue of God stood there, bathed in the subtle light, looking at the surrounding darkness with a face full of pity. An old man in a white robe knelt in front of the statue and prayed devoutly. The darkness was deep, the candlelight was weak, and the prayers were silent. The whole hall seemed to have been completely frozen. The windows in the hall were open. The clear but extremely strange sound of waves came over, with the sound of countless pieces of ice colliding with each other. The ice wind in the depths of the Arctic Ocean whistled into the hall. The candlelight began to tremble, and the light and shadows in the hall were constantly turbulent. The whole hall seemed to be filled with an uneasy aura. The statue of God was still compassionate. The old man was still silent. Mellad looked at the old man in front of the statue. His expression was calm, but his heart was beating faster and faster. Another gust of cold wind whistled past, piercingly cold like a knife. The curtains in the hall were blown up. In the shrill sound of the wind, the candlelight in the hall began to spread. The faint flames seemed to be burning out of thin air. Bits of light were scattered in every corner of the hall, extremely soft. The old man opened his eyes and his voice was strangely soft and low. "The eyes of God are watching here, and the light is about to come." He raised his hand slightly. The candlelight in the whole hall burned more and more vigorously. The dim yellow light brought by countless remaining candles gradually turned white, so pure that it was almost dazzling. "But these are all fake." Mellad looked at the old man in front of him and said calmly, "What God created is naturally true," the old man said with a smile. Mellad's body tensed up, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. In the entire Vatican, only one person was qualified to wear a white robe, and only one person was qualified to wear a white dress. The latter was the Holy Virgin, and the former was the Pope. Only the Pope. No one could have imagined that after they had no choice but to withdraw from Reiki City, the Vatican, which was already badly battered, did not take advantage of the situation to withdraw from Eastern Europe. Instead, the Pope came in person. Obviously, the Pope was not willing to give up the interests of Eastern Europe. "Who the hell are you?" The Pope walked casually in the vast hall, and his tone was also careless. "Mellad, I need an explanation for all this. If there are no accidents after Eastern Europe, you will have many choices such as continuing to stay in the Holy Disarmament Corps. I will give you more autonomy. I even want you to go to the Knights Templar to be the new Grand Knight Commander, or stay in Eastern Europe and be the spokesman of the Vatican in Eastern Europe." The Pope's tone was indifferent. "I've thought of many possibilities and they're all about you. I dared to use you, but I didn't expect you to give me such a big surprise." He paused for a moment before continuing, "Who are you? Your Highness the Pope, does it really matter who I am? More importantly, I saved Aris's life," Mellad said quietly. On the night of the trial day, he had saved Arsis in the most impossible situation, and his hidden strength had also been completely exposed. This news could not be hidden at all. However, Mellad had finally brought Arsis back to the secret base of the Vatican. For him, the exposure of his identity was no longer a big deal. The most important thing was that with the exposure of his identity, some plans that had been quietly changed had to be carried out by him. For example, convincing the Pope. In fact, if you hadn't hidden your strength and joined forces with Arsis, the situation might not have been like this. The Pope said with a pleasant expression, "You betrayed the glory of God and brought great losses to the Vatican. Mellad was silent for a while, then shook his head with a wry smile. Betrayal is a sin. The Pope said slowly, but God is merciful. He will forgive your sin and allow you to enter the kingdom of God. Go repent, Mellad. In the flickering candlelight he snapped his fingers. An incomparably huge sense of crisis suddenly permeated. If this chapter is not over, please turn the page. The bottom of the abyss enveloped Mellad. Deadly danger came at him from all directions. He subconsciously began to step back. Ah. A roar that was close to madness suddenly cut through the night sky. The entire palace shook violently from the roar. All the light in the hall shattered in an instant. Mellad suddenly opened his eyes. The Pope was standing not far from him. The flickering candlelight was still there, but it was much smaller. He had already knelt in front of the statue of God, holding a steel knife in his hand, and had already cut open the skin on his chest. Blood flowed down. Mellad only needed to put in a little more strength, and he could pierce his heart with his own hands. In an instant Mellad broke out in a cold sweat. After the trial day, Mellad and Arcis immediately entered the secret base of the Vatican in Recchi City. The Pope prayed at the first opportunity. This time the prayer was not for an hour or a day but for a few days and nights. Even when the other members of the Vatican officially left Recchi City, the Pope did not move. The prayer continued until just now. After the prayer the Pope was not weak. Instead, his essence, chi and spirit had completely reached the peak. In his spiritual domain, as long as he wanted, Mellad would be in danger at every step, and he would not even have the ability to fight back. Was this the transcendent realm? Mellad's breathing was rapid. The fear of walking on the edge of life and death turned into extreme anger in an instant. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the Pope. He said in a fierce voice, "Your Majesty the Pope, you want to kill me? How dare you kill me? It's you who needs to repent." The Pope's voice was gentle and calm. "Okay, repent. Use my own life?" Mellad laughed loudly. "How about now? I'm still alive. You can't kill me. This is God's will." The Pope said slowly, "God has given you life. You should thank God." Mellad stared at the Pope. Sweat and blood continuously flowed from his body. The Pope looked at Mellad quietly, his eyes deep and bottomless. After an unknown period of time, Mellad took a deep breath, stretched out his hand, and drew a cross in front of his chest. The Pope smiled with satisfaction. "I like your attitude now." He poured himself a glass of water and took a sip. God created all things. In front of the great glory, everyone must remain in awe. He poured another glass of water and handed it to Mellad. "So who on earth are you?" Mellad looked at the glass of water and did not dare to take it for a moment. In the Pope's spiritual domain, even though he was an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he did not dare to be sure of his current state, let alone believe his own perception. In his sight, he saw the water that the Pope handed over, but who knew what it was? He took a deep breath, gritted his teeth and said, "It doesn't matter who I am. I want to know your identity." You refuse to answer. That's arrogance. The Pope said in a gentle tone. Arrogance was a sin. Mellad hesitated for a moment and said slowly, "I'm a follower." The Pope's body suddenly stiffened for a moment. The candlelight around him also seemed to be slightly shaking. "Follower?" His tone was a little surprised. "Whose follower?" "Of course, His Majesty's follower." Mellad said calmly, "Your Majesty the Pope, I came back this time and brought back His Highness Arcis to show our sincerity. Our Majesty wants to cooperate with the Vatican and conspire with the overall situation of Eastern Europe." "Your Majesty? Your Majesty." The Pope repeated twice and took a deep look at Mellad. "Which Majesty?" "The Duke of the Dark World. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." There were only two recognized majesties. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong and the Pope. Now, the majesty behind Mellad was obviously not Wang Tianzong. "I don't know." The follower replied in a calm tone. The Pope narrowed his eyes and suddenly smiled. "Can I understand it this way? You betrayed the Vatican, and the majesty who made you betray the Vatican is your real master. You don't even know who he is?" "It doesn't matter." Mellad said calmly, "I don't care what his identity is, but he can give me what I want." "What do you want?" the Pope suddenly asked seriously. Mellad smiled self-deprecatingly. "The Vatican can't give me what I want." The Pope fell silent. "I don't trust such cooperation." The Pope was silent for a long time before he said calmly, but I don't mind you telling me what I can get by cooperating with His Majesty. What you can get depends on what you want and what you are willing to pay. Mellad said meaningfully. The Pope smiled and said calmly, before I have a complete plan, I'm not willing to pay anything. But you can try to persuade me with your life. The meaning of these words couldn't be more obvious. Mellad was in the Pope's territory and could only be controlled by the Pope. If the cooperation today failed, Mellad naturally couldn't live. Mellad thought about it seriously and said calmly, His Majesty can give you the theocracy that the Vatican has always wanted. He said calmly, the theocracy of the whole of Eastern Europe, the Eastern Church, has been destroyed. The faith of all the people in Snow Country and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe can be given to you. Given? The Pope laughed. His laughter was extremely cold. How arrogant. In this world, except for the great God, no one is qualified to give me anything. Then let's change the words. Mellad said casually, deal. His Majesty can give you the theocracy that you want the most. The Pope leaned against the sofa and said slowly, why does His Majesty think that he can give me these things? He looked at Mellad and said meaningfully, the 5 countries in Eastern Europe are Li Tianlan's world. Up until now no one can deny this. Mellad nodded. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe do belong to Li Tianlan. But sometimes, in sensitive times, the direction of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe is decided by Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State, the Pope muttered to himself thoughtfully. As for Snow Country, the Vatican's roots in Snow Country are not shallow. When the general situation is settled, His Majesty will naturally help from behind and let the entire Vatican be unimpeded in Snow Country. Mellad continued. The Pope looked at Mellad and his eyes became calmer and calmer. Mellad hesitated for a moment and said slowly, Your Majesty, if you agree to cooperate with us, we can show enough sincerity now. Sincerity? The Pope gently raised the corner of his mouth. For example? The Polar Ground Alliance. Mellad said calmly, if you are willing, the entire Polar Ground Alliance will be our sincerity to the Vatican. The Pope's body suddenly shook for a moment. If you are willing, maybe we should change places now. Mellad said lightly. Where? The Pope narrowed his eyes and finally became serious. Mormons. The Pope lowered his head and thought for a long time. Then he slowly said, if we can cooperate, what do you want? In the darkness, Mellad laughed and made threatening gestures. He looked at the Pope and calmly put forward his request. We want the Knights Templars. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 561. The Polar Ground Alliance collapsed with a bang. But this super dark force, which used to dominate Eastern Europe and could be called the most bloated organization, still had unimaginable interests within it. Even today, after 2 of the 4 major families in Eastern Europe were destroyed and the other 2 changed their positions. As the saying goes, a centipede dies but it doesn't fall down. Today the general framework of the Polar Ground Alliance still existed, and its internal structure was chaotic. However, from another perspective, as long as there were experts to sort things out, there would still be countless useful people in the Polar Ground Alliance. The remaining Polar Ground Alliance, as the sincerity of cooperation between the mysterious His Majesty and the Vatican, was indeed a big deal. But the other party's big deal also meant a big appetite. It was just as Mellad had said. We want the Knights Templars. The Pope looked at Mellad quietly and was silent for a long time. The other party's big deal was beyond imagination, and the other party's request was also outrageous. After a long time, the Pope slowly opened his mouth and wondered, Are you crazy? His Majesty said that we are worth it. Mellad said calmly, Think about Eastern Europe at this time. You don't need to worry about the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. His Majesty will put pressure on Li Tianlan and Zhongzhou State. You just want the religious power of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe? As long as His Majesty gives enough pressure, Li Tianlan, who is eager to develop his own core power, can only compromise. In addition to the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, if the Polar Ground Alliance is used by the Vatican's chances of winning will also be extremely great. The faith of the whole of Eastern Europe belongs to the Vatican. In contrast, how is a Knights Templars not worth it? It's worth it indeed. The Pope said lightly, but why should I believe that you can give me the Polar Ground Alliance? Nothing is taken for free. Mellad paused and a very strange light flashed in his eyes. If the Vatican wants to get the Polar Ground Alliance, it needs to do something. For example? The Pope asked with great interest. The current Polar Ground Alliance, with the destruction of the Violet and Morton families, the Qin clan and Rekvia's change of position, is extremely chaotic internally, but in fact, Snow Country has occupied a great advantage and everyone can see this. The Pope nodded. There were almost no powerful countries in Eastern Europe. Snow Country could be said to be the only top international hegemon country in Eastern Europe. They occupied the world's largest territory. They were tough, greedy, and aggressive. The strong desire to fight seemed to be engraved in their bones and blood. Great changes had taken place in the four great families, and the Polar Ground Alliance had collapsed. The higher-ups and important figures of the Polar Ground Alliance had already regarded Snow Country as their best place to rely on. At present, the reason why the Polar Ground Alliance was so chaotic was that with the great changes of the four great families, they were splitting internally. Today, most of the power of the Polar Ground Alliance had fallen to Snow Country, but within them, the supporters of more than a dozen other countries also occupied a certain proportion. The most important thing was that the Qin clan in Rekvia had united and won a considerable part of the power within the Polar Ground Alliance. Now this power could be said to be the biggest stumbling block for Snow Country to control the Polar Ground Alliance, and this power undoubtedly belonged to Zhongzhou State at this time. The Pope glanced at Mellad and asked, "So, you have the confidence to persuade Snow Country? Or convince Zhongzhou State?" He thought about it, shook his head and continued, "Is it Snow Country? Li Tianlan would definitely not let go of the power of the Polar Ground Alliance that belonged to Zhongzhou State. In this way, the biggest possibility was that the mysterious His Majesty had the confidence to persuade Snow Country? In fact, His Majesty has already persuaded Snow Country." Melad's body gradually relaxed. "Now the whole Snow Country, His Majesty is waiting for me to persuade you." He looked at the Pope and said meaningfully, "The cooperation is right in front of us, and it only needs you to reach out once. This chapter is not over, please turn the page." The eyebrows of the Pope slightly raised as he slowly said, "Before this, we already had the intention to cooperate with them. From the current situation, we are the only choice of the Snow Empire. Since that is the case, why should I rely on you to cooperate with the Snow Empire?" What he said was completely true. Nowadays, the whole of Eastern Europe was in a state of insecurity. The situation was just like East Island more than 3 years ago, or even more serious than East Island. As the strongest country in Eastern Europe, Snow Country had to make a choice and invite a force that could stabilize the situation of the Dark World in Eastern Europe to Snow Country. At the same time, it could stabilize its position and also contend against the pressure brought by Zhongzhou State. Nowadays, looking at all the major forces in the world, only the Vatican met this standard. And relatively speaking, the Vatican didn't want much. What they wanted was faith. At least for the time being, there was no conflict of interest. If the two sides cooperated, they could rest assured of each other in the short term. "You said it before. That was before." Mellad explained patiently, "The president of Snow Country was born in the Violet family, and the Violet family has a close relationship with the Eastern Church. Is the intention to cooperate at that time really credible?" "Well, even if it is credible at that time, His Highness Arsis was still in his peak state. As for now..." He shrugged. "It's a pity." The Pope's eyes were slightly cold. "So you deliberately let Arsis be seriously injured but then saved him?" Mellad was silent. He didn't mind exposing his identity, but he had to sit back and watch Arsis be seriously injured. He couldn't explain this kind of thing. "But even so, we are still the only choice of Snow Country." The Pope said indifferently, "Compared with any force that Snow Country can invite, we want even less." "You still don't understand. What Snow Country really wants to invite is not some force but experts. With the foundation of the Snow Empire, they only lack experts. It's just that most of the experts today have their own standpoints, so they want to invite other forces. No matter how you look at it, the current Vatican is not the best choice for the Snow Empire. The best choice for the Snow Empire is us, because compared to the Vatican, our strength has not formed yet and we want less." The Pope's eyes slightly narrowed. What Snow Country needed now was indeed experts. If an Invincible Realm expert who was close to the peak of the Invincible Realm but had no clear position joined Snow Country would probably give him the most luxurious treatment at all costs. In that case, they didn't need to invite other forces. To say the least, Mellad, whose own force had not been formed yet, and His Majesty behind him were much better than the Vatican. As long as Snow Country paid the price, the mysterious His Majesty's force would develop in Snow Country in the future, and it would be the local force of Snow Country. Regardless of His Majesty's strength, Mellad alone was enough to stabilize the current situation of Snow Country. But now His Majesty wanted to use Snow Country to exchange for Knights Templars. Obviously, compared with Snow Country, whose strength was intertwined and entangled, His Majesty, whose own foundation was insufficient, didn't want to be involved in the current cooperation and future game with Snow Country. He didn't have the confidence to participate, but the Vatican had the confidence. The weight of Knights Templars they wanted was naturally not as great as that of the whole Snow Country. But Knights Templars was a relatively young force in the Dark World. Its organization was simple, and its core was clear at a glance. Besides, it had Melit's qualifications in the Holy Disarmament Corps. Knights Templars was undoubtedly the best to control. Even if its scale was a little small, its potential was endless. If Knights Templars were in his hands, it would be a real sea and sky for His Majesty. The Pope thought of His Majesty's conclusion. "We are worthy of each other." Finally he nodded. "Get ready. Let's go to Mormon's." Melit's face bloomed with joy and a bright smile. He gave a somewhat exaggerated salute and said, "I'll arrange it right away. Your Majesty the Pope." He placed a small bottle in his hand in front of the Pope. "What's this?" "Teaching, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page." The Emperor raised his eyebrows slightly. "A small gift, a very magical medicine." Mellad smiled and said, "His Highness Arasus's injury is very serious. But if the Vatican wants to completely control the Polar Ground Alliance, I'm afraid there will be a conflict with the power of Zhongzhou State. His Highness Arasus's power is very important. This medicine can't make him return to his peak state, but within about 12 hours after taking the medicine, it can make him recover at least half of his combat capability. The only drawback is that the period of weakness is very long, very long. Your Majesty the Pope can use it at your discretion." "Give it to me." An incomparably deep voice suddenly sounded behind Mellad. The Pope and Mellad turned their heads at the same time. In the dark corner of the hall, an incomparably burly figure walked over. His figure was steady, but as he moved forward, the candlelight in the room began to shake slightly. The cold wind blew in, but it was melted by the aura of this figure. The temperature of the entire hall seemed to be rising. The cold wind seemed to be burning, turning into an angry flame. Arsis. Ever since he had been rescued by Mellad, Arsis had been in a coma. He had only just woken up. The roar just now had imperceptibly interrupted the Pope's spiritual domain, which could be considered to have saved Mellad's life. Mellad bowed slightly. Arsis didn't say a word. His eyes were fixed on the bottle of potion that Mellad had put down. His body swayed as he took a step forward and reached for it. In his sight, the bottle of potion suddenly began to shine. Countless pure rays of light gathered together and turned into a silver cross. Arsis subconsciously withdrew his hand and looked at the Pope. "It's not the time yet." The Pope waved his hand and the potion turned into a cross again. Arasus's face was distorted. Endless fury almost completely drowned his reason. "I'm going to kill them. I must kill them all." He bellowed word by word. He was one of the strongest people standing at the peak of the Dark World. An expert at the peak of the invincible realm. As the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, he had never been as embarrassed as he had been on the trial day. As one of the most qualified figures to decide the battle situation on the trial day, in such an important battlefield, his role was infinitely close to zero. All his dignity and pride seemed to have been completely shattered in that battle. Arasus's eyes trembled a little, and he almost lost his mind. Mellad lowered his head and suddenly said, "Your Highness, instead of thinking about revenge, we might as well study why such a situation happened that night." His eyes looked at the shimmer floating under his feet and he said blandly, "You've been crowned by His Majesty the Pope. How could you be hypnotized by a mere patriarch in Eastern Europe? Isn't that strange?" Arsis was stunned for a moment. "What?" He slowly turned his head and looked at Mellad, his eyes bloodshot. "It's very simple. Someone destroyed your state of coronation." Mellad said calmly, "And the means are extremely brilliant. Such a person knows the coronation very well, and he is also a master in the spiritual field." Oh. Arsis suddenly let out a roar. Mellad stopped talking. The Pope sighed deeply and was a little disappointed. He had already known who the so-called traitor was. He was a master in the spiritual field, and he knew the coronation and could get close to Arsis. There were only two of them in the world. The Pope was not in Eastern Europe that day, and it was impossible for him to destroy the coronation. So there was only one candidate left. The Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Angel. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 562. It was completely quiet in the hall. Just like the depressing atmosphere before a storm, Arcis suddenly became incomparably quiet. The Pope was quiet and silent like a statue. Mellad stared at the glimmer on the floor as if he was lost in thought. Arcis stood there motionless as if he was stunned. After an unknown period of time, the Pope glanced at Mellad with a deep look in his eyes. Mellad didn't say much, but he said a lot. He didn't try to sow discord. But after telling the truth without batting an eyelid, the Vatican, especially the Pope, had to do something. That was the truth. The coronation of the Pope could greatly improve the will of the person being crowned. In such a state, Aricis's will would be extremely focused from beginning to end. In the case of absolute focus, his reaction, speed, and even strength would be slightly improved. Correspondingly, the physical strength that Arcis needed to consume would be reduced correspondingly. In general, the coronation of the Pope was enough to improve Aricis's combat effectiveness to an obvious level. And such a coronation would also not be affected by any spiritual interference from the outside world. On the night of the trial day, it was impossible for Arcis to be hypnotized. But the impossible had become a reality. Naturally, there was only one reason. That was, there was a traitor within the Vatican. Angel. The dignified Holy Virgin of the Vatican, whose status was second only to the Pope, had betrayed the Vatican. Even the Pope's heart was extremely heavy in the face of this news. He was still hesitating about how to deal with this matter, but Mellad had already told the truth. Although he didn't mention Angel, Arcis wasn't stupid. How could he not guess who the traitor was? In this way the Pope had to take action. Go and ask Angel to come over. The Pope was silent for a while and said with some tiredness, I want to see him. At this moment, Mellad, who no longer belonged to the Vatican, glanced at Arcis. Arcis stood there expressionless. He did not say a word and was extremely quiet. Mellad shrugged and said, I'll go now. He slowly turned around and left the hall. The Pope squinted at his back and did not speak for a long time. This was a secret base set up by the Vatican outside Reiki City. To be exact, it was a hidden church built on a beach in the mountains. Its area was limited, so the building did not look magnificent, but its momentum was extremely magnificent. At this time the Pope lived in the largest hall in the church. As the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, Angel, who had too many choices, only chose a small prayer room. A faint light was burning in the prayer room, and the cross was flickering. Angel, dressed in a white dress, knelt in front of the cross, quiet and holy. When the roar that represented the awakening sounded, Angel had just finished his prayer. She opened her eyes, but her body did not move. She only quietly experienced the rage and hatred contained in that roar. His Highness Arcis is awake. A strange voice rang out behind Angel. The voice was very soft, but it was extremely cold. It was extremely uncomfortable to listen to it. A slender figure shrouded in a black robe walked to the candlelight from the darkness. Intentionally or unintentionally, she blocked the door to the prayer room. Angel stood up, her posture elegant. Her voice was calm and calm. In that case, His Highness the Pope should have made up his mind. The figure in the black robe was silent for a while, then nodded and said, yes. She paused and continued, in our opinion, His Majesty has made up his mind. What? Angel smiled and turned her head. Behind the white veil, her eyes were bright and clear. Just because you're here? As long as I'm here, Your Highness, you can't leave. This is the will of the Pope. To some extent, this is also the attitude of His Highness the Pope. The figure in the black robe said softly. You're wrong, Rhea. Angel sighed faintly. This is the secret base of the Vatican. At least the surrounding area is within His Majesty's spiritual domain. He can sense everything here. Without his permission, it's impossible for me to leave and I can't escape. He sent you here to monitor me to test the attitude of the other higher-ups of the Vatican. So far, I think he has received enough feedback, and it's time to make up his mind. Rhea, dressed in black, trembled slightly. Angel looked at her and said softly, so you're not as important as you think. Rhea, the chief high priest of the Holy Punishment Priests. In terms of duty, she was Angel's right-hand woman, but in fact, she could be considered the most powerful candidate in the Holy Punishment Priests to keep the Holy Lady in check. The Pope had sent her to keep an eye on Angel. This task had excited Rhea for a long time. She even fantasized about the possibility of becoming the next Holy Lady of the Vatican. But only now did she know that the Pope's spiritual domain could cover this place. Thinking of some of her actions in the past few days, for some reason, her face was a little pale. Angel did not continue. She just turned to look at the cross in front of her and said softly, tell me which one is more important, the the Holy Lady of the Vatican or the Saint War Angel? Rhea did not answer. She did not need to answer anything. The Holy Lady was second only to the Pope, so her importance was naturally greater than the Saint War Angel. But this was only on the surface. Within the Vatican, the Holy Lady represented faith. The Saint War Angel, on the other hand, represented real combat power. In fact, which one was more important depended on the situation of the Vatican at the time and the will of the Pope. Rhea gritted her teeth and said respectfully, "His Highness the Pope is fair." "Fair?" Angel nodded. "Oh, fair. You did something wrong and you must be punished." Rhea's voice was sinister. Obviously, she was saying that the question of which was more important was meaningless. The most important thing was that Angel had destroyed Arisus's coronation state, directly causing Arisus's serious injury and the Vatican's failure. Such a mistake was the most important. "I didn't think it would be like this either." Angel sighed softly. Her tone was extremely complicated. It seemed like she was telling Rhea but also explaining to the Pope. This was the first time Angel had explained since the trial day. Although the Pope was not in front of her, he was in his spiritual domain. Angel believed that he could hear everything here. "What?" In a trance, there seemed to be another voice extremely far away. Then Rhea's voice came. "Unexpected? What were you thinking at the time, Your Highness?" "It's meaningless to talk about it." Angel smiled self-deprecatingly. "Even from our current standpoint, it's no good for us to fall out with Li Tianlan. His Majesty and Arsis both saw the huge benefits of Europe after Rothschild lost its leader. Such benefits could even make them give up Eastern Europe. But in fact, with the relationship between Rothschild and the Wang family of Beihai, even if Wang Tianzong didn't show up that day, would Li Tianlan really dare to kill them? To say the least, even if Paul and King Tong died, Li Tianlan and Zhongzhou state would not be willing to make a wedding dress for the Vatican. If Arsis succeeded that night, Li Tianlan would definitely fall out with him as soon as possible. At that time, it would be a problem whether the Vatican could go out of Eastern Europe or not. This problem had been mentioned on the night of the trial day. But it was not recognized by the Pope and Arsis. That was why she secretly took action and destroyed Arisus's coronation state. At that time she just wanted to prevent Arsis from completely killing Paul and King Tong. In her plan, after severely injuring Rothschild, she would first stabilize Li Tianlan. The two sides would conspire to Eastern Europe and then attack Rothschild. However, she really didn't expect what would happen next. Arsis, who was not in the coronation state, would actually be hypnotized. In the end, she would achieve nothing and the Vatican would also suffer a crushing defeat. This was really the worst result. Even if she fell out with Li Tianlan that night, it would probably be the same. "I'm afraid it's more than that, isn't it?" Melad's voice suddenly sounded from outside the door. "I think the main reason is that Your Highness doesn't want to be enemies with Zhongzhou state. Your past is there and so is your deep love. It's in a certain assassin. If you have a choice, you will definitely not fall out with Zhongzhou state and even destroy His Highness Arisus's coronation state. Is that right?" Angel suddenly turned around. Under the gauze, her eyes fell on Melad's face with anger. Melad was slightly stunned, then he shrugged his shoulders. He bowed and said with a smile, "Your Highness, His Majesty the Pope invites you in." Angel's body trembled slightly. After a long silence she slowly said, "Let's go." Rhea made way for him. Angel walked out of the prayer room and walked to the hall. It was dark ahead. In the darkness, no one could tell whether the danger of fire or frost began to spread gradually and occupied her whole consciousness. The church was getting closer and closer. Melad, who could be considered to have officially separated from the Vatican, finally stopped. He looked at Angel's back with a complicated look in his eyes. In his sight, the fluttering white dress was completely swallowed up by the darkness in the hall. Angel's face was still calm. He glanced at Arsis and then bowed slightly to the Pope. The Pope looked at him in silence. In the almost frozen darkness, the flickering light of the candlelight gradually expanded. The Pope's voice sounded, "Angel, you did wrong." "Yes." Angel was silent for a while. "I'm willing to take responsibility and," whoosh, the ice wind by the sea whistled in with the wind and rain. A huge figure suddenly appeared beside Angel. Bah! With a crisp sound, Angel's delicate body flew out directly. A smear of blood and teeth fell to the ground. The veil fluttered and fell in the darkness. Boom! The whole hall shook with a loud bang. Angel's body hit the pillar of the hall and slowly slid down. Under the white veil, the beautiful face of the Holy Virgin Angel was a little blurred in the darkness. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. It was a shocking sight. Take responsibility? Arisus's furious roar echoed throughout the hall. How can you take responsibility? What right do you have to take responsibility? Can you afford to take responsibility for such a serious loss of the Vatican? You dirty and lowly woman. When I knew that you were not a virgin, I should have persuaded His Majesty to purify you. Arcis stared at Angel and smiled viciously. It's not too late now. Go to hell, bitch. The candlelight spread again. All of Arissus's roars were drowned in the candlelight. Outside the hall, Mellad slowly turned around and walked in the other direction. He climbed a hillside around the church and looked at the waves in the darkness. The wind and rain fell and all the sounds became extremely messy. Mellad took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The call was quickly answered. Is it done? The mysterious His Majesty's voice sounded on the phone. Angel has gone to see the Pope. Mellad said respectfully, from now on, there should be no Holy Virgin in the Vatican. The mysterious His Majesty smiled and said, Oh, how will the Pope deal with Angel? It depends on the intentions of all the higher-ups of the Vatican. But if there are no accidents, the Vatican will purify her, Mellad said in a low voice. After all, he had stayed in the Vatican for many years. When it came to purification, his tone was a little unnatural. Purification. This was the cruelest criminal law within the Vatican, and it was a criminal law that had never been used in recent years. It was usually used to deal with heresy that had caused great losses to the Vatican. The Vatican would first inject an extremely precious drug into the person who was being purified. This drug would not have any direct increase in combat power, but it could make the injected person's spirit unprecedentedly concentrated, and his spirit was absolutely concentrated. This also meant that the other party would always be awake, and his body would become extremely sensitive to external pain. Then the saint warriors would tie the other party to the cross, light the fire and burn the body. The purified heresy would always be in the most sober state and would be burned alive when his perception was extremely sensitive. This was purification. His Majesty was silent for a while, then clicked his tongue and said, It's really cruel. The dignity of God cannot be offended, Mellad said subconsciously. He shook his head self-deprecatingly and said softly, Your Majesty, I don't understand why you are targeting Her Highness Angel. If I hadn't exposed her tonight, the Pope might not have made up his mind to purify Angel. You can't bear it? His Majesty's voice was a little playful. Mellad shook his head. No, it's just, he gave a wry smile and didn't say anything in the end. I'm not targeting her. In fact, if I ascend to the peak of the dark world in the future, the Vatican will definitely be one of my most troublesome opponents. From this point of view, it's actually not a bad thing for Angel to control the Holy Punishment Priest group. She's a very kind woman, and it can even be said that she's simple. She deserves the title of Holy Virgin. I have a good impression of her. With her existence, we will have less trouble in the future. After all, with her character, she won't cultivate too many troublesome fanatics. His Majesty's tone was a little emotional. But these are all things that need to be considered in the future. Now, how can I care about the future? I must solve the trouble in front of me. It's very troublesome and also very important. What trouble? Mellad said subconsciously. Tell me, if Li Tianlan leaves Eastern Europe, who is the most qualified to take over Li Tianlan's position? His Majesty suddenly asked. Mellad was silent for a moment subconsciously. His Majesty had already given the answer. It can only be tribulation. Don't underestimate tribulation. In Eastern Europe, not only me but everyone else can't do anything. Jiang Shangyu can't beat him either. Sometimes, his deterrent power is no less than that of the peak of the invincible realm. He has to die. Only when he dies can everyone feel at ease. If Angel is purified, it's impossible for tribulation to remain indifferent. Mellad said, So to purify Angel, you want to get rid of tribulation with the help of the Vatican? I told you, didn't I? As I said, I have a grudge with Arcis. But in order to cooperate with the Vatican, I can only let you save his life. He saved his life, but it doesn't mean that he can live. I used the knife of the Vatican to get rid of tribulation, and I also used the sharp edge of tribulation to get rid of Arcis. Since we can cooperate with the Vatican, it's time for Arcis to die. His Majesty said calmly. This? Mellad hesitated for a moment. Can tribulation kill Arcis? Tribulation had a very high evaluation in the Dark World. He was the only assassin of the invincible realm in the Dark World. But on the divine and holy list, his evaluation was not high, and he didn't even enter the divine list. Arcis, on the other hand, was a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he was seriously injured, tribulation should not be his match. What's more, he had just left Arceus a bottle of potion that could temporarily restore most of his combat capability. I said, don't underestimate tribulation. His Majesty's voice was a little distant. At present, it only depends on whether he knows how to let go. All right. Mellad smiled bitterly. If tribulation is really lucky enough to kill Arceus, what about our cooperation with the Vatican? What cooperation? His Majesty's voice was full of innocence. Mellad suddenly felt that the ice wind between heaven and earth was really cold, cold to the bone. Conspiring with the overall situation of Eastern Europe is something that the Vatican and other superpowers are interested in. What does it have to do with me? His Majesty chuckled. Look at the current Samsara Palace. They cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital for the benefit of the chaos in Eastern Europe. We cooperate with the Vatican for the benefit as well. But the so-called benefit is, after all, just something said. Except for those who are persuaded, no one will care. Mellad suddenly couldn't laugh anymore. Samsara Palace? He murmured to himself. What Samsara Palace wants is a new era. She doesn't care about the benefit of Eastern Europe. It doesn't matter who she gives it to. His Majesty said. What about you? Mellad asked. Me? His Majesty laughed. Why don't you understand? What I really want is Knights Templar. Now he had more than one invincible realm expert around him. But strictly speaking, the relationship between the two sides was not the kind of relationship that could be completely trusted. His Majesty had no so-called foundation or heritage, so what he really wanted was a foundation that could allow him to develop. There was such a foundation in Eastern Europe. But he couldn't take away the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. He couldn't take Snow Country. As for the territories outside Snow Country and the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, they were also entangled. In contrast, in the whole Dark World, only Knights Templar was the simplest. But the organization of Knights Templar was also the most streamlined and comprehensive. As a vassal agency of the Vatican, most of the complicated internal entanglements were concentrated in the Vatican. The internal environment of Knights Templar could be said to be the simplest force. Such a foundation was what His Majesty needed the most. So he cooperated with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He cooperated with Wang Qinglei. Jiang Shangyu entered Eastern Europe. Some of these collaborations had been implemented, and some had not been implemented. But it didn't matter because even if these were just cooperation intentions, they could become bargaining chips in his hands. He used these bargaining chips to persuade Snow Country. Then Mellad exposed his strength and persuaded the Vatican. Snow Country cooperated with the Vatican, and His Majesty would also cooperate with the Vatican. In this way, the Vatican got Snow Country and the broken but still bloated Polar Ground Alliance. But His Majesty got the entire Knights Templar. Mellad suddenly felt that something was wrong. The cooperation this time was simple and vague. Snow Country paid most of the power of the Polar Ground Alliance for this. And the Vatican paid Knights Templar for this. Then what did His Majesty pay? His Majesty finally, it seemed that he paid some saliva? And it was Mellad who paid the saliva to persuade the Vatican. He held his mobile phone and was silent for a long time. Then he said seriously, Your Majesty, does this count as getting something for nothing? Chapter 563. On the second day after Li Huaqing arrived in Reki City, the atmosphere in the whole city became extremely subtle. The excitement of the people welcoming the friends from Zhongzhou State gradually subsided. The media, which had been singing praises for a whole day yesterday, began to analyze the huge business opportunities and economic effects brought to Wulan State and even the whole of Eastern Europe after the close connection between Zhongzhou State and Wulan State. The major media openly described the welcome dinner held for Zhongzhou State as the top summit in Eastern Europe and Zhongzhou State. It seemed that in order to confirm this statement, Wulan State also directly responded. In the airport of Reki City, civil aviation flights to all parts of the world were temporarily grounded. The international airport of Reki City seemed to have become a paradise for private jets. From Li Huaqing's arrival until noon the next day, one private jet after another landed in the international airport of Reki City. Could be said that there was an endless stream of them. The patriarchs of the wealthy families in Eastern Europe who could stand on the stage gathered in Reki City. They did not come alone. Each of them brought a professional negotiating team and prepared detailed plans in advance. Top bodyguards, business elites and wealthy families kept pouring out of the airport. As soon as they arrived in Reki City, they used all their connections to ask for a meeting with the delegation members of Zhongzhou State. Some of the wealthy families had roughly the same intention of cooperation with Zhongzhou state. Before they could see the distinguished guests of Zhongzhou state, they had become competitors with each other and even had several conflicts. However, no matter how they fought with each other when it came to Zhongzhou state, everyone behaved extremely meekly. These people who stood at the top of Eastern Europe were undoubtedly the ones who could really see the current situation clearly. But they were all businessmen. They used the power of capital to do whatever they wanted in the world of capital. This was a world that was purer than the dark world to some extent. In the world of capitalists, there was no so-called hot-bloodedness or a sense of belonging to the country. What they wanted was only interest. Therefore, they knew that Zhongzhou state did not come to Eastern Europe for any cooperation at all. Its fundamental purpose was to plunder. But when the media sang praises of merits, these people were more enthusiastic than anyone else. Whether it was plunder or cooperation for them, as long as it was beneficial, it was good. So in less than a day, Li Tianlan received countless gifts. There were all kinds of gifts. There were valuable ancient armors that had been collected by the big families for decades or even hundreds of years, famous swords used by famous generals in Eastern Europe, and some medals with great history. After knowing that Dongqing Rushi was by Li Tianlan's side, some extremely expensive gemstone jewelry were also sent by the big families. The top economic circle in Eastern Europe had always been extremely strange, or it could be said that it was a common problem in all capitalist countries. There were very few wealthy families at the top. For example, the former four families occupied most of the resources in Eastern Europe. With the benefit chain they created, some small wealthy families rose. The so-called prosperity in Eastern Europe was supported by the four families and many small families. As for some middle-level wealthy families, there was little room for them to develop in Eastern Europe. When many small wealthy families sent gifts to Li Tianlan, just by looking at the gift list, the approximate evaluation of professionals had already exceeded 9 figures. Li Tianlan could be said to have made a windfall. Li Tianlan did not stand on ceremony and accepted all the gifts. In fact, it had nothing to do with corruption. Behind each gift was a network in Eastern Europe. When many networks were intertwined, they became a network that could cover the whole of Eastern Europe, no matter how Zhongzhou state treated Li Tianlan now. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. It was so subtle. At least in the future, the 5 countries in Eastern Europe would be Li Tianlan's world. Li Tianlan did not trust these small wealthy families, and these wealthy families did not trust Li Tianlan either. Accepting this gift was the first step in contact between the two sides. With a good start, all the exchanges in the future would naturally be able to gradually deepen. The Qin clan, which had now become the largest wealthy family in Eastern Europe, did not send any gifts. But Qin Dongqiao, the patriarch of the Qin clan, had already appeared in the Manlisai Hotel in Reki City early in the morning. The first person he looked for was Li Tianlan, not Li Huaqing. This also showed the attitude of the Qin clan to a certain extent. However, he seemed to have appeared a little too early. He arrived at the hotel at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was not until nearly 8 o'clock in the morning that Li Tianlan appeared in front of Qin Dongqiao. Li Tianlan looked a little tired, but his smile was still calm. He shook hands with Qin Dongqiao and sat down on the sofa. He seemed to be a little apologetic. He shook his head and said with a smile, "Mr. Qin, I'm sorry for the neglect." He had not come back since he left the office of the president yesterday. It was already late at night after he chatted with the master of Samsara Palace. Then Dongqing Rushi sent him another document. When he finished reading it overnight, it was nearly 3 o'clock. Qin Weibai had been staying by his side after taking a shower. While he was reading the document, she was watching him. He could not let down the beautiful scenery and the beautiful woman on such a good day. Li Tianlan forced himself to read the document calmly and immediately turned into a beast. He held the delicate body that was enough to make the world crazy and tossed it until dawn. Even when Qin Dongqiao had just arrived in Reki City, the last war between him and Qin Weibai had not ended. Li Tianlan received the call, but he was too lazy to move at that time. He slept for 2 hours in a daze. Finally, he struggled to get up and came to the Manlisai Hotel. "Your Highness is busy and has to take care of everything. I'm half the host. I'm a little ashamed that I didn't come until today." Qin Dongqiao shook his head with a smile. "I'll remember the Lin clan's contribution this time. Mr. Qin, you and I don't need to be so polite." Li Tianlan laughed. Dongqing Rushi came over with 2 cups of tea. When she put the tea beside Li Tianlan, her delicate little nose twitched. The unfamiliar but unforgettable fragrance entered her nostrils. Dongqing Rushi glanced at Li Tianlan and pursed her lips. Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed. He coughed and said directly, "Mr. Qin, did you come here today for tonight's dinner?" "Of course," Qin Dongchao said with a smile. This patriarch of a wealthy family, who was deeply rooted in Eastern Europe beyond everyone's imagination, was in his 50s. Although he was still handsome, his face actually looked a little old. But his eyes were extremely deep and his behavior was meticulous. His every move was full of energy with a kind of power of a high position. He was steady but extremely domineering. "This is only part of the reason, and it's not even the main reason," Qin Dongchao said softly. "The Qin clan cooperates with your highness. I believe that no matter what, your highness will never treat your friends badly." This was not a retreat for the sake of advancing, but a real serious explanation. Tonight's dinner in Reki City, to some extent, was the beginning of Zhongzhou State's division of the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries. All the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries would be held in the hands of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State would use these interests to cooperate with the local wealthy families in Eastern Europe, digest them and then tie them to their own chariots. This was a banquet crazy and unimaginable. When the cooperation between Zhongzhou State and many wealthy families gradually deepened, and after completely squeezing the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries, Zhongzhou State would also start from each wealthy family to conquer, plunder, and squeeze the interests of other Eastern European countries besides the 5 Eastern European countries. These patriarchs of the wealthy families might not be able to see this, but sadly no one cared about it at all. As Li Tianlan's staunchest ally, the weight of the Qin clan could not be overstated. Qin Dongchao did not have to come to such a dinner. If he really came here because of the dinner, it not only showed that he did not trust Li Tianlan, but also showed that he was narrow-minded and wanted to make people laugh. "The main reason I came here today is to meet your highness. In addition, I am also very interested in some things in your highness's hands. I don't know if your highness can part with them," Qin Dongchao said tentatively. "What things?" Li Tianlan felt a little strange. "I heard that your highness received a lot of gifts yesterday. I think if those small families are not stupid, they should all know that giving gifts is just the beginning. Since your highness has accepted them, you naturally have to wait for their further expressions. So if there is no accident, soon the real sincerity of each family should arrive. And what the Qin clan wants is this sincerity. Even a part of it is good," Qin Dongchao said quietly. At this moment he did not give people the feeling of shrewdness but wisdom. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and felt a little emotional. In fact, Qin Dongchao was still wrong about one thing. The sincerity of each family was not about to arrive. Some of the families who reacted quickly had already sent their sincerity to Li Tianlan as soon as he received the gifts. This so-called sincerity was simple and shocking. Within one day, at least 20 small families wanted to cooperate with Li Tianlan and were willing to sell a part of their family's core business shares at a low price. The highest one was even willing to sell 45% of its shares to Li Tianlan, and all of them were at a low price. They invited Li Tianlan to jointly develop their family's current core business. No matter how small a wealthy family was, it was still a wealthy family. The core business of these wealthy families was equivalent to some core businesses of the whole of Eastern Europe. This was the information that Li Tianlan saw last night. It could be foreseen that this part of the wealthy families who reacted quickly at present was only the first batch. Perhaps in the afternoon, perhaps in the evening, perhaps in understanding, more and more wealthy families would continuously throw out their core businesses and invite Li Tianlan to jointly develop them. Li Tianlan could not give up these things. They could even be said to be his most important bargaining chip in Eastern Europe. As long as he took over the core businesses of these families, Li Tianlan would be equivalent to holding the core of the whole of Eastern Europe, which was a huge and unimaginable benefit. The only bad thing was that if he wanted to get such benefits he needed to invest as much in the early stage. No one denied that this was a good thing. Li Tianlan's vision was not shallow enough. He really wanted to eat this big cake. The wealthy families sent their core businesses to him and he really wanted to take them all. There was no hesitation, no problem. But the problem was, he had no money. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 564. Money was not everything. But it was impossible to do without money. In fact, strictly speaking, Li Tianlan and East Emperor Palace were not poor. Their main source of income came from the investment of the Flourishing Age Fund. This sounded a little mean, but no one who really knew the Flourishing Age Fund dared to say so. The economic strength of the forces invested by the Flourishing Age Fund depended entirely on the support of the Flourishing Age Fund, not the financial strength of the Flourishing Age Fund. What did it mean to be as rich as a country? Han Donglu, the boss of the Flourishing Age Fund, was probably really as rich as a country. For him, the so-called money was really just a string of numbers. When he was so rich, no matter how long the string of numbers was, it was even meaningless. Li Tianlan had received 2 investments from the Flourishing Age Fund for the establishment of East Emperor Palace. If the first investment was the so-called small amount, then the second investment of tens of billions of yuan was enough to be a real big amount. Moreover, the money had been in the account before Li Tianlan came to Eastern Europe. It was in the hands of Ning Qianqing and he took it to Tiannan. It was not a small sum of money anywhere. It was just that Li Tianlan wanted too much. The core business of any wealthy family in Eastern Europe, even if it was just a small share, could not be bought with tens of billions of capital under normal circumstances. Now, although they intended to sell it at a low price, it was completely different concepts to have no choice of dependence and tentative cooperation. This low price would not really be so low. With Li Tianlan's current funds, he could probably barely take over the core business of 2 small families, and this was still under the condition of giving up the investment of Tiannan. Li Tianlan really had no money. But he had a lot of choices. The Dongqing clan and even the entire giant group. The academics. The Flourishing Age Fund. He had chips in his hands, so he had countless choices. At present, what he was going to take over was part of the core business of almost all the families in Eastern Europe, including energy, military, aviation, real estate, media, construction, oil, minerals, automobiles, from the lifeline of the country to the clothing, food, housing, and transportation. All the core industries in Eastern Europe were in front of him. As long as he paid, he could take them away. As long as he had enough money in the future, Li Tianlan could hold the heart of all Eastern Europe. With such a situation and such a general trend, would he be afraid that no one would invest? Therefore, Li Tianlan was not in a hurry at all. He was not in a hurry to call Han Donglu to ask for additional investment. On the contrary, he was still waiting for calls from the Flourishing Age Fund and many others. Now, the news had only spread for a day and the Qin clan came knocking on their door. 3 days later. 5 days later. More and more people would come to Li Tianlan for cooperation. This was a real big business. In front of Li Tianlan was a big cake, ripe, delicious, with expected benefits that could drive people crazy. This was his best chance since he entered the secular world. He really wanted to use this opportunity to build his own complete team. After a moment of silence, Li Tianlan suddenly smiled and said, "Mr. Qin, I can't rush this matter at the moment. You should understand. But I'm in a hurry." Qin Dongchao said with an undisguised wry smile, "I can't wait to negotiate with Her Highness in the next second. As for the price, everything is negotiable." Li Tianlan drank his tea and said calmly, "You don't have to be in such a hurry. It's not a matter of urgency but a matter of priority. In today's dark world, no one can question Her Highness's future. Now there is such a good opportunity. Everyone understands that at this time, the first one to approach Her Highness is a friend. In the future they will drink wine and eat meat. The last one to approach can only be a dog who may not even be able to gnaw the bones hot." Qin Dongchao was a little emotional. Compared with others, he undoubtedly knew more. After all, the Qin clan could be said to be the first big force to contact Qin Weibai. So this time Qin Dongchao did not hesitate at all. He could see the end of this mess and naturally he could see Li Tianlan's position in the new era. Li Tianlan's foundation in Wulan State was now unshakable. After completely digesting Wulan State, Zhongzhou State would definitely plunder all the resources in Eastern Europe as soon as possible. His future position in Eastern Europe was completely unimaginable, so countless small families did not hesitate to take out part of their core interests, looking forward to being tied to Li Tianlan. If Li Tianlan took this interest, he would be the future core of Eastern Europe. Those families who cooperated with Li Tianlan could also take advantage of the situation to get more benefits from Zhongzhou State. This was a real win-win situation. As long as they leaned on Li Tianlan and had no other thoughts, they would not take any risks. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. This was Li Tianlan's future position. For Eastern Europe, if Li Tianlan was stable, Eastern Europe would be stable. For Zhongzhou State, if Eastern Europe was stable, Li Tianlan would be stable. At this moment, Qin Dongchao thought of the Samsara Palace and the Li family. In fact, he didn't know much about the Li family. The collapse of the Li family was vigorous. But when the aftermath of the collapse swept through Eastern Europe clapped its hands and cheered. At most, it felt a kind of joy after surviving the disaster. The shadow brought by the 2 highnesses of the Li family, who swept through the whole of Eastern Europe like a gale, had not been eliminated. Otherwise Wulan State would not be so cowardly today. That was why the Samsara Palace was making arrangements here. Even though the old man of the Li family was no longer in the invincible realm, he was still awe-inspiring. He was making arrangements in Tiannan. That was a gift from the Li family to Li Tianlan. And the Samsara Palace was making arrangements in Eastern Europe. That was a gift from Qin Weibai to Li Tianlan. As long as Li Tianlan took over Eastern Europe and Tiannan, such a foundation was enough to build a new dynasty. Even an empire. Mr. Qin, you're too serious. Li Tianlan shook his head and said, those who can support me at this time are all friends. Qin Dongqiao smiled and said quietly, Your Highness, we don't have to be polite. Since Your Highness entered Eastern Europe, the Qin clan has spared no effort in supporting Your Highness. Not to mention that the second brother is still lying in the hospital, the power of the Qin clan is still strangling Violet and Morton. I'm not asking for credit from Your Highness. I just want to say that the Qin clan has never let Your Highness down. So today I sit in front of Your Highness with a clear conscience. I think the Qin clan is qualified to sit in the same boat as Your Highness. Of course. Li Tianlan smiled without hesitation. He reached out and poured a cup of tea for Qin Dongqiao. He said seriously, I remember everything about the Qin clan. Qin Dongqiao nodded and said softly, in that case, Your Highness, I think we can still talk. Since we are all sensible people, it's more convenient to talk about it. Your Highness has a lot of chips in your hands. These chips are enough for Your Highness to set up a real team in Eastern Europe. The Qin clan can't take all of them, but it's not too much to want to take some, right? At this time, I think I should be able to talk to Your Highness. Li Tianlan smiled and handed Qin Dongqiao a cigarette. He narrowed his eyes and said, What's your intention, Mr. Qin? We don't want much. At present, there are about 4 families that have taken a fancy to you, such as the Colin family. No matter how much they offer you, the Qin clan will bear this number for you and is willing to give Your Highness 30% more. As for the shares that the Colin family gives you, the Qin clan wants 70%. He looked at Li Tianlan with calm eyes. Li Tianlan held the teacup and looked at Qin Dongqiao with a faint smile. All this seemed to be very good. The Colin family was a big family in Wulan State. It could also be said to be one of the most powerful families in Wulan State except for Rekvia. In the agreement given to Li Tianlan, the Colin family was willing to sell 30% of its shares to Li Tianlan. Their offer was 15 billion Zhongzhou dollars, and the details could be discussed later. This price was really low. If it was on a normal day, it was hard to say how many shares the Colin family could buy with 15 billion Zhongzhou dollars. In fact, the Colin family would not sell at all. Obviously, the Colin family had great expectations for Li Tianlan's future and cooperation with Zhongzhou State. Now, according to the conditions of the Qin clan, Li Tianlan did not have to pay a penny. The Qin clan would pay the money and give him 30% more. What they wanted was only 70% of the 30% shares. If Li Tianlan operated well, it was equivalent to getting 10% of the Colin family's shares for nothing. It sounded like a bargain. But in fact, the Qin clan was mercilessly demanding an exorbitant price. Even if Li Tianlan did not pay, his status was there. If he wanted to find someone to pay for him, many people would be willing. After all, this was the core interest of countless core areas in Eastern Europe. Without Li Tianlan, the Colin family would not sell these things even if they were beaten to death. When the Qin clan gave money, they wanted to swallow 70% of Li Tianlan's interests. It was a beautiful dream, but how was it possible? However, Li Tianlan was not angry at what Qin Dongqiao had done. This was the attitude that a patriarch of a wealthy family should have. Friendship was friendship, but business was business. Li Tianlan suddenly had a mischievous idea. Qin Dongqiao wanted 70% of the shares. Li Tianlan simply wanted to be more outrageous. He wanted to say that he would only be given 10%. That was what he thought. Just as he was about to speak, the door of the living room was pushed open from the outside. A somewhat familiar voice sounded outside. Ah, does he live here? I don't think so. We should consider investing in Reki City. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. A hotel. Qin Dongqiao and Li Tianlan looked at each other and looked back at the same time. In their sight, Dongqing Rushi came in with a man and a woman. They looked like a father and a daughter. Walking in the front was a thin middle-aged man. He looked around with his hands behind his back and his eyes were deep and calm. Qin Dongqiao's face was gloomy. His heart also sank slightly. The middle-aged man nodded to Qin Dongqiao as a greeting, and then looked at Li Tianlan with a smile. What are you talking about? What are you doing here? Before Li Tianlan could speak, Qin Dongchao had already asked coldly. The middle-aged man was stunned, and then he couldn't help laughing. What do you mean, old Qin? You know that there is business here. I'm not stupid. How can I not know? Li Tianlan looked at the middle-aged man who came in, and his eyes lit up slightly. Then he looked at Qin Dongchao and saw a touch of helplessness and embarrassment in his eyes. Old Han is here. Sit down. Xinyan, sit down too. Rushi, go make tea. Li Tianlan stood up, full of enthusiasm. Not to mention Qin Dongchao, even if this father and daughter faced all the economic giants in terms of wealth, they could not be at a disadvantage. Han Donglu, the boss of the Flourishing Age Fund in Zhongzhou State, and his daughter Han Xinyan. Li Tianlan and Han Donglu were not familiar with each other, but he called Han Donglu and Xinyan very naturally, which showed that they were very familiar with each other. Han Xinyan's body trembled slightly. In a trance, she seemed to see Li Tianlan raising the butcher's knife and slaughtering the entire Qin clan. Han Donglu sat down on the sofa and looked at Qin Dongchao, whose face was gloomy. Then he smiled and said, "It seems that I came at the wrong time." Qin Dongchao snorted coldly and said nothing with a sullen face. It was not his fault that he had no tolerance. The Flourishing Age Fund had just swept Eastern Europe more than a month ago. At that time, it was the time when the chaos of the Dark World swept toward Eastern Europe. An oligarch family in Snow Country was destroyed. In an instant, all financial funds were like sharks that smelled blood. The Flourishing Age Fund cooperated with the Wang family of Beihai as soon as possible, and a large amount of funds rushed into Eastern Europe. On the same day, financial giants all over the world heard the news, and the unimaginably strong funds instantly broke the financial order of Eastern Europe. Eastern European currencies rose and fell. In just a few days, the Flourishing Age Fund had taken away a lot of wealth from Eastern Europe, and part of this wealth must belong to the Qin clan. The Flourishing Age Fund had grown to the extent that everyone hated it but also feared it. Many people hoped to cooperate with the Flourishing Age Fund to plunder the wealth of other countries, but they were also wary of the Flourishing Age Fund attacking them as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Such a notorious financial fund, wherever its boss appeared, as long as it was not for cooperation, he would most likely be boycotted by all the wealthy patriarchs in the country. You came at the right time. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. Old Han, I recently have more core shares of some Eastern European families such as the Colin family. I was just talking to Mr. Qin about this issue. He intends to give me 30% more funds and take away 70% of the shares of the Colin family that belong to me. We are still talking about it. Qin Dongchao glanced at Li Tianlan expressionlessly. Li Tianlan smiled brightly. Qin Dongchao smiled bitterly in his heart and did not speak. Give him 30% more, but 70% of the shares? Han Donglu glanced at Qin Dongchao and said with a smile, the surname of the Qin clan shouldn't be Qin. It should be He. Qin Dongchao was furious and said with a black face, What do you mean? I brought the most professional analysis team of the Qin clan, we. Come on, as if everyone has a few analysis teams. When it comes to this kind of team, our Flourishing Age Fund can be said to be the top. Han Donglu smiled. The Colin family? He thought for a moment. Ah, the one in the military industry in Reki City? It just so happens that I'm also interested in this family. Tianlan, why don't you listen to my offer? Han Donglu said with a smile. Li Tianlan nodded and did not say anything. Well, I'll pay the same amount as old Qin. As for the shares, Han Donglu looked at Li Tianlan. There was a flash of complexity in his eyes. He said, I want 10%. How about it? Well, Li Tianlan sprayed the tea he had just drunk onto Qin Dongchao. Qin Dongchao seemed to be unaware of it. He was stunned for a while before he suddenly stood up and said, Are you King crazy? That's it. Han Donglu waved his hand lightly. I've prepared the contract. I can sign it at any time. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 565. For a moment, Qin Dongchao even thought that the current situation was a trap set up by Li Tianlan and Han Donglu. They offered the same amount of money to buy 10% of the Colin family's shares. And this 10% was not 10% of the entire Colin family, but 10% given by the Colin family to Li Tianlan. In the Lin clan's estimation, the Colin family could at most give Li Tianlan 30% of the shares. 10% of the 30% was 3%. They used nearly 20 billion to buy this 3%. With their assets at this level, such an acquisition was no longer a question of value. Even if the 3% of the Colin family was really worth it, no one would buy it. A huge amount of money was thrown into it, and what they could get back was just some dispensable dividends. What was the use of this 3% for a small shareholder who didn't even have the daily decision-making power of the Colin family? No matter where this money was placed, it could generate more than this amount of income. But when Han Xinyan really took out the contract from the briefcase and handed the pen and paper to Li Tianlan, Qin Dongqiao really realized how outrageous everything in front of him was. The contract was printed with the seal of the Flourishing Age Fund and Han Donglu's signature. That was to say, as long as Li Tianlan signed his name with the pen, the contract would take effect immediately, and the deal would be over. How could this be? How could this be? Qin Dongqiao's mouth kept trembling. As the boss of the Flourishing Age Fund, did he really have so much money that he didn't know how to spend it? This is 20 billion. Not 200 yuan. Even Li Tianlan was a little stunned. He subconsciously took the pen and paper handed over by Han Xinyan. For a moment he was a little hesitant, not knowing whether he should sign or not. He wanted to tell Qin Dongqiao 10% of the shares before, but that was the attitude of the other party asking for a sky-high price. In fact, this 10% was as outrageous as the 70% that Qin Dongqiao wanted. If he took a step back, there would be room everywhere. However, Han Donglu directly set the shares at 10%. Is he really crazy? Is it fun to throw money like this? Han Donglu, we're sitting here talking about business. Do you have to make things difficult for me? Qin Dongqiao took a few deep breaths. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. His tone became calm again. I'm happy to spend some money to disgust you, Han Donglu said with a smile. Qin Dongqiao's eyes sharpened. When he was about to speak, Han Donglu waved his hand and said, well, I can't spend money casually. Everyone is the same. But Qin, you are really stingy. I said 10% of the shares of the Colin family is 10%, and I mean 10%. This is the sincerity of the shares of the Colin family. I mean 10% of the shares of the Colin family. This is the sincerity of the shares of the Colin. Li Tianlan glanced at Han Donglu with doubts in his eyes. And then he said with Han Li, he smiled and said, Qin is, and Qin, the Lu he didn't Qin Tianli, he Donglu. Qin Dongqiao felt a little helpless. He was the first to talk to Li Tianlan about cooperation. He just wanted to get some benefits. In business he would not refuse to get more from Li Tianlan. He knew that 70% was a little outrageous, but the lowest expectation in his heart was about 30%. Moreover, Qin Dongqiao was confident that if there was no accident, this price could be negotiated. But the accident happened. The Flourishing Age Fund, which could no longer be described as rich, intervened and became a sucker to show its so-called sincerity. In this way, if Qin Dongqiao wanted to offer a high price, Li Tianlan would sign unless he was a fool. Mr. Qin, the Colin family doesn't care how many shareholders it has. With the Flourishing Age Fund, the Qin family can also have the Colin family. I can transfer part of the shares the Colin family sold to me. If you are interested, we can talk about it. Li Tianlan said with a smile, but he was a little excited. Almost no one knew that he had taken the first step in taking root in Eastern Europe, which started when he just signed his name on the contract. He exchanged 1% of the shares of the Colin family for 20 billion yuan. With the support of the Flourishing Age Fund, Li Tianlan could use the money to buy the core business of other families. What Li Tianlan held in his hand was the core bargaining chip of the whole of Eastern Europe. If he showed a little bit, there would be many people who were willing to buy it at a high price. Li Tianlan's wealth would increase, and so would his assets. The entire East Emperor Palace was completely on the right track in this uneventful morning. Qin, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Dongqiao was silent for a while, then nodded and said, the Qin family will also show enough sincerity. I want 10% of the shares of the Colin family held by your highness. As for the price, it's the same as Han Donglu's. Okay. Li Tianlan nodded, asked Dongqing Rushi to take a document, and put it in front of Han Donglu and Qin Dongqiao. This is the letter of intent of each family, including the number of shares they are willing to sell to me and the price. I believe this is only the first one. There should be new families joining in later. You too can choose something you are interested in. As for the price, I won't let you suffer a loss, but I won't suffer a loss myself. There's no need to read it. Han Donglu pushed the document to Qin Dongqiao, looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, the Flourishing Age Fund wants a share of these businesses. I brought the professional team of the Flourishing Age Fund this time. You will receive the offer from the Flourishing Age Fund before tonight. Qin Dongchao's eyes twitched. He glanced at Han Donglu and said sarcastically, "The Flourishing Age Fund is indeed the leading financial giant, but there are many industries in it. Han Donglu, aren't you afraid of choking to death?" Industries? Han Donglu glanced at Qin Dongchao. For some reason, the patriarch of the Qin clan suddenly felt that the eyes of the financial giant in front of him became extremely strange for a moment. Then he shook his head with a smile and said softly, "How can this be an industry? This is the whole of Eastern Europe. The business of the Flourishing Age Fund will expand to Eastern Europe recently, so I can buy as many of these things as Tianlan has. Money is not a problem." Li Tianlan laughed. His attitude was actually the same as Han Donglu's. When he was in control of Eastern Europe, he could have as many partners as Han Donglu. Projects and shares were not a problem. In the face of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, his ambition had been burning uncontrollably. He wanted to build a real empire based on Eastern Europe. The more people joined this feast, the more partners he would have, and the more stable the empire would be. Today was only the first day. But the Flourishing Age Fund and the Qin clan had joined in and become the giant pillars that could support his entire empire as stable as a rock. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, the new era had not yet arrived. But the empire belonging to Li Tianlan had already taken shape. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 566. Everything was as Qin Dongchao and Han Donglu had expected. Just after noon, the number of people visiting Li Tianlan suddenly increased. The patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families in various fields in Eastern Europe seemed to have made an appointment. They came one by one. For most of the afternoon, Li Tianlan was busy entertaining guests. No matter how arrogant Li Tianlan was, he would not neglect those who gave him money and power. These were the real distinguished guests, so his smile was always warm, kind, and extremely gentle. The people who came to visit at this time naturally knew the rules. Although they wanted to communicate with Li Tianlan more, they also knew that if they did not leave, they would not only offend those who were waiting to see Li Tianlan, but also offend Li Tianlan. Therefore, the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families were extremely happy. After putting the letter of intent in front of Li Tianlan, they went straight to the point. For Li Tianlan and the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families, cooperation was very necessary and irresistible. With this premise, it was easy and pleasant to talk about business. Although such cooperation was not finalized in a few words, the one who took the longest time only sat in front of Li Tianlan for less than 30 minutes. What surprised the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families the most was Li Tianlan's generosity. What each family brought this time was their core business. The number of shares they were willing to sell to Li Tianlan showed their sincerity. Naturally, no one was willing to give more, but no one dared to give less. Before they came, they were even prepared to be lowered by Li Tianlan. This was a very normal thing, but the most abnormal thing was that no matter how much they offered, Li Tianlan agreed without hesitation and stated that the funds would be in place in the near future. No matter what level the business was at, such a straightforward man was rare. When the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families left, they were satisfied and had great expectations for future cooperation. The continuous reception officially ended at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was still raining in Reki City, and the sky was gradually dimming. The light was on in the study. Li Tianlan held a letter of intent and looked at it carefully. In front of him, there was a thick pile of letters of intent from each family. Li Tianlan looked at the letter of intent in front of him, his eyes filled with satisfaction. He didn't care about the price at all. Anyway, he had no money. No matter how much the other party offered, he couldn't afford it. However, with this letter of intent in his hand, a large number of people couldn't wait to pay for him. In this way, lowering the price became meaningless. What Li Tianlan needed to do was very simple. Sign, take the money, pay, and then sit back and wait for the money. It was a pleasure working with you. It seems that people from Zhongzhou State should be transferred here to deal with these things. Li Tianlan put the letter of intent aside and sighed with emotion. Tribulation was in charge of the Snowdance Corps, so there was no need to worry. But he couldn't count on the iron-blooded soldiers of the Snowdance Corps for the cooperation at present. It involved dozens of wealthy families and countless core businesses, and the funds involved were unimaginable. In this kind of cooperation, both the investment and the income every day were enough to drive people crazy. Li Tianlan knew himself well. At least he couldn't handle these businesses with ease. Moreover, among the people he knew, there didn't seem to be any talent in this field. Except for Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. I'll call my family and ask them to send someone over. Dongqing Rushi, who was accompanying Li Tianlan, said. Li Tianlan was stunned. Dongqing Rushi misunderstood him and said, "Don't you trust us?" "No, it's just that I didn't expect the Dongqing clan to have such a talent. Even if there is, it won't be easy to transfer them over, will it?" Li Tianlan laughed. "I'll figure it out." Dongqing Rushi was full of confidence. She paused and continued, "Han Xinyan can also help. You tell Han Donglu and he will agree." Li Tianlan nodded. It was such a big cooperation. No matter how ambitious Han Donglu was, he couldn't let go completely. If Han Xinyan stayed, she could not only help but also reassure the Flourishing Age Fund. Li Tianlan reached out and pinched Dongqing Rushi's nose. When he was about to speak, the phone suddenly rang. It was Qin Weibai's phone call. Li Tianlan picked up the phone and said with a chuckle, "You're up?" On the other side of the phone, Qin Weibai. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." After a pause, she snorted with dissatisfaction and said with hatred, "You're not satisfied that I'm not tortured to death by you, are you?" Li Tianlan laughed, and his eyes inadvertently met Dongqing Rushi's. Dongqing Rushi's eyes were clear, and her face was innocent. Li Tianlan subconsciously stopped smiling and coughed. "Where are you?" Qin Weibai asked softly. "Still in the hotel." Li Tianlan patted the letter of intent beside him and said, "I dealt with some things." Qin Weibai was silent for a few seconds and then said softly, "I'm leaving." Li Tianlan paused and looked up at his watch. "Mormons?" "Yes. I'll see you off." Li Tianlan stood up without hesitation and hung up the phone directly. "Wait for me." Dongqing Rushi stood up and took a coat from the hanger. Li Tianlan hesitated, held her hand and said, "Little Bai is here but she's leaving soon. Come with me to see her off." "A sister?" Dongqing Rushi said and looked at Li Tianlan. "Were you with my sister last night?" There was no jealousy in her tone, only curiosity. But for some reason, Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little guilty. He said vaguely, found a coat for Dongqing Rushi and put it on. "Let's go. I'll find someone to prepare the car." Because the distance between the two hotels was not far, it took Li Tianlan only 10 minutes to get to the hotel where Qin Weibai was. In the hotel room, Master of Samsara Palace was still sitting in front of the windowsill, looking at the wind and rain outside. Flaming Fire was sitting in the living room and drinking tea. The sound of a hairdryer was heard in the bathroom. Qin Weibai in a white bathrobe had just taken a shower. Her hair was wet and she was standing in front of the mirror to dry her hair. Seeing him come in, Master of Samsara Palace turned around and nodded as a greeting. Flaming Fire didn't even raise her head. Li Tianlan glanced at her and ignored her. He just looked at Qin Weibai standing in front of the mirror and said, "Why are you in such a hurry?" "Something came up and I have to deal with it." Qin Weibai sighed softly. She had promised Li Tianlan to attend the dinner tonight. She put down the hairdryer and walked out, sounding a little regretful. "Sister." Dongqing Rushi stood beside Li Tianlan and called. Qin Weibai was stunned for a moment, then smiled and touched Rushi's hair, saying softly, "Come in and sit down. Let me introduce you." Qin Weibai walked into the living room with Dongqing Rushi and said softly, "This is..." Dongqing Rushi. Master of Samsara Palace interrupted Qin Weibai. She glanced at Qin Weibai with calm eyes. "I know her." Qin Weibai was silent for a moment, then nodded and said to Dongqing Rushi, "This is my sister, Master of Samsara Palace." Dongqing Rushi didn't ask Master of Samsara Palace what her name was. Instead, she bowed seriously and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." Master of Samsara Palace glanced at her, and her eyes were a little intimate. At that moment he didn't know whether it was an illusion or something else, but he seemed to vaguely see guilt in this touch of intimacy. He didn't know whether it was an illusion or a real emotion, but the Master of Samsara Palace regained her indifference. She looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "Is Eastern Europe very lively today?" Li Tianlan answered, "Yes, mainly because my place is more lively." "I heard about it." Master of Samsara Palace said slowly, "Since all the big families want to be with you, this is a good opportunity. What's your plan?" "It's hard to say at the moment." Li Tianlan shook his head. "This is indeed a good opportunity, but the business is too big and many things are not easy to deal with. After returning home, I will arrange for people in this field to do business, to do big business, to the extent that it concerns the lifelines of several countries. I can't deal with it for the time being. If the Dongqing clan has talents in this field, they can borrow them first. Let me recommend 2 people to you." Master of Samsara Palace said. Li Tianlan took a deep look at her and asked, "Are they from Samsara Palace?" No. Master of Samsara Palace shook her head. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. When you were in a coma, there was a rumor in Reki City. It's very popular." Li Tianlan was a little confused. "The rumor is that the Qin clan intends to unite with you by marriage and betroth Qin Qinyao, the eldest miss of the Qin clan, to you," Master of Samsara Palace said. Li Tianlan touched his nose subconsciously, shook his head and said, "Ridiculous." Of course he had heard of this rumor, but he had never taken it seriously. He said, "It's true." Master of Samsara Palace said, "Qin Dongqiao did have this idea. He even sent Qin Weiyun to test you, but was stopped by Qin Shilai. But for now this is only temporary. As your business gets bigger and bigger, this idea will emerge from the Qin clan sooner or later. In this case, it's better to take the initiative to ask the Qin clan for Qin Qinyao. To come over?" Li Tianlan frowned. "I want to work for you, be your woman and do anything." Master of Samsara Palace said lightly, "Don't worry, the Qin clan has no reason to refuse and Qin Qinyao will not refuse. You don't even have to promise anything. As long as you ask, Qin Qinyao will appear in front of you immediately." Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes, looking like a sulking cat. She didn't speak, nor did Dongqing Rushi. "If you don't want to ask about this, I can help you. In business, Qin Qinyao is very useful and very useful. As for the other one, it's Han Xinyan. If you want Han Xinyan, you have to go to Han Donglu yourself. But Han Donglu won't refuse." Master of Samsara Palace suddenly smiled. "If you're willing, it's best to put Rushi in Eastern Europe. This girl looks silly, but when it comes to doing things, she's no worse than anyone else. The Qin clan and the Flourishing Age Fund are the two pillars that support your foundation. If you ask the young ladies of these two forces to come over, Rushi is fully capable of balancing the relationship between them." Li Tianlan frowned. Before he spoke, Master of Samsara Palace had already waved to Dongqing Rushi. "Come here." Dongqing Rushi hesitated and walked to Master of Samsara Palace. Master of Samsara Palace stood up, reached out and gently touched Dongqing Rushi's head. Dongqing Rushi looked at her with her eyes wide open, a little confused. "Since you're here today, how about I help you once?" Master of Samsara Palace looked into Dongqing Rushi's eyes and asked. At that moment the whole world seemed to become distorted and blurred. The messy wind and rain whistled and gathered in front of them. The raindrops were messy and cold. Heaven and earth were changing color and everything was pale. The vast snow covered the city without warning. The tall buildings turned into mountains. The lone peak stood tall and the world was vast. Dongqing Rushi's eyes were dazed and dull. Li Tianlan clearly saw that she took a step back with one foot, but her other foot was moving forward. Master of Samsara Palace's hand that fell on her head began to shine. It was colorful and the sword intent soared into the sky. Dongqing Rushi stared at the sword light blankly. She retracted her foot that had stepped back. Master of Samsara Palace's palm fell. Dongqing Rushi suddenly opened her mouth. She didn't make a sound. But in that instant, everyone heard a silent and mournful scream. Dongqing Rushi spat out a mouthful of blood. Li Tianlan's face changed dramatically. He walked over and held Dongqing Rushi in his arms. He turned to look at Master of Samsara Palace, and his eyes suddenly became deep and calm. "It's for her own good." Master of Samsara Palace took a step back, and her tone was a little tired. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, looked at Dongqing Rushi in his arms and said in a deep voice, "How are you?" Dongqing Rushi blinked her blank eyes, and they became moist again. At that moment the spiritual energy in her body seemed to be completely alive, and she became extremely agile. She even sounded a little happy. "I'm fine." As if she had broken free from some shackles, her voice was clear, cheerful and extremely delicate. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 567. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi seriously. The scene in front of him seemed to be beyond his understanding, but vaguely he seemed to catch something. It was so vague that he was at a loss. After vomiting blood, Dongqing Rushi's breath was still stable. She seemed to have no injury, but her spirit became a little sluggish after the initial excitement. She leaned in Li Tianlan's arms, reached out her hand and grabbed his ear. She murmured, "I'm so sleepy. I want to sleep." "Go to my room." Qin Weibai said softly, "It's open until tomorrow. She can have a good sleep." Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai, nodded and carried Dongqing Rushi. Her room was open until tomorrow. Did it mean that she had known that Dongqing Rushi would come? She had prepared for everything in front of her. He carried Dongqing Rushi to Qin Weibai's room. When he put her on the bed, Dongqing Rushi, who couldn't open her eyes, had fallen asleep. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi, who was sleeping sweetly on the bed, and was silent for a long time. He could feel that Dongqing Rushi wasn't hurt, but he could also feel her weakness. That kind of weakness wasn't because of her body, but because of the exhaustion of her willpower. As a result, Dongqing Rushi's realm directly regressed 1,000 miles. Perhaps no one had noticed that there was a genius among the younger generation of Zhongzhou state. That was Dongqing Rushi. She had been very close to the half-step invincible realm, but she looked too soft beside Li Tianlan, so people always subconsciously ignored her. But her previous realm had always been there. If they really fought against each other, no one dared to underestimate her. But now, in the blink of an eye, Dongqing Rushi's realm had slipped from the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and then her breath became stable again. Li Tianlan slowly turned his head. Qin Weibai stood quietly beside him, also looking at Dongqing Rushi, who was sleeping. Her eyes were a little complicated and she was in a trance. "What the hell is going on?" Li Tianlan asked, and his voice was calm. "This is indeed for her own good. No one wants to harm her, but in her current state, there is no good opportunity and no one can help her. When she is by your side, her heart is the most relaxed, and it is also the time when her instincts are the most relaxed. Moreover, during this period of time, her condition is very good, so sister took the risk to help." Qin Weibai paused and continued, "The result is not perfect, but it's not bad." Li Tianlan nodded and said directly, "I don't understand." Qin Weibai hesitated and said softly, "Rushi Tianlan." Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He didn't want to lose his temper with Qin Weibai, but now he was really a little annoyed. First, it was because Dongqing Rushi's realm had regressed. Second, it was because of the negative emotions brought about by things that were beyond his control. He, who had become more and more used to controlling everything, especially disliked this feeling. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep puff. Her mental state is extremely poor now. Her injuries are not only physical, but sometimes mental injuries are even more serious. Her mental strength is at most half of her normal state. That's half. Qin Weibai said, "Rushi's normal state has always been abnormal. Now she is really normal." She looked at Li Tianlan with gentle eyes and said quietly, "Have you forgotten Dongqing Yueshan?" It was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water on his head in the dead of winter. Li Tianlan's body shuddered violently, and he could no longer speak. He had indeed forgotten. From Zhongzhou state to Eastern Europe, and then he and Dongqing Rushi were lying in the same bed. Li Tianlan couldn't remember how long it had been since he last saw Dongqing Yueshan's personality. In front of him, it had always been Dongqing Rushi, lively, obedient, well-behaved, and charming. The sharp personality that belonged to Dongqing Yueshan had never appeared from beginning to end. Rushi has two personalities. Dongqing Yueshan's personality is very independent, and she is also very aggressive. Silly Tianlan, that personality is not like this. She may not have any good intentions towards you. Just now, when my sister attacked, she directly crushed Dongqing Yueshan in the spiritual field and severely injured her personality in an instant. Although that personality has not completely disappeared, it is destined not to appear for a long time. Without the support of this personality, Rushi will naturally be weak. But now Rushi is simply her. At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a scene from a long time ago. It was the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago. Before the final battle, on the night when they were investigating in Changdao, Dongqing Rushi's blade was indeed very close to his body at a certain moment. But it was stopped by Du Hanin that time. After such a long time, Li Tianlan had long understood that it was Dongqing Yueshan who pretended to be Dongqing Rushi's personality at that time. If Du Hanin hadn't taken action in time, it was hard to say what would have happened to Li Tianlan, who was completely defenseless against Dongqing Yueshan. Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead and asked, "Why did Dongqing Yueshan want to kill me?" "Who knows?" Qin Weibai's tone was a little cold, but it was not aimed at Li Tianlan. It's not surprising that this kind of distorted personality can do anything. Now, although my sister has hurt her badly, she hasn't completely destroyed her. Sooner or later, she will appear again. We have to find a chance to make her disappear completely. Li Tianlan smoked for a long time and then said slowly, "I'll pay attention." Qin Weibai said no more. She took Li Tianlan's palm and said softly, It's safe here. Let her sleep. Let's go next door. I have something to give you. Li Tianlan silently turned around and closed the door. In the suite next door, Flaming Fire was not drinking tea. The master of Samsara Palace had stood up and was ready to leave at any time. Li Tianlan looked at her back and his heart became more and more complicated. He took the initiative to say, "If there's anything I can help Mormons with, just tell me. I'll do my best." Even those who didn't know about the dark world could understand the power of doing his best at this time. That was all the overt and covert forces of the Snowdance Corps, countless wealthy families in Eastern Europe, and even the entire giant group of Zhongzhou State, Sai City, and the Li family. This was Li Tianlan's full effort. No need. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look at Li Tianlan. After a long time, she shook her head and said, "I can handle it." After a pause, she continued, "Besides, it's my battlefield." Li Tianlan shook his head and said blandly, "In my opinion, there's no need for this so-called battlefield to exist." It doesn't make sense to say this. The master of Samsara Palace laughed. Everything has started. It's too late. It's too late to say anything. The sky was completely dark. The strong wind and heavy rain fell from behind her. All the stories in this era, and all the grievances should be put to an end by someone. The master of Samsara Palace said softly, "The former chosen one will become a thing of the past, and the new chosen one has risen. Do you remember what I said? Don't let yourself down in anything in the world. Don't let yourself down and don't let him down. I once ended the era of the chosen one. Now I'm opening a new era for the new chosen one." The master of Samsara Palace's smile was light and emotionless. My whole life." Her voice gradually deepened. "My whole life." There seemed to be a huge weight stuck in Li Tianlan's throat. He stared at the master of Samsara Palace in a daze and couldn't say a word. The master of Samsara Palace took a deep breath and took a notebook with a blue cover. She said softly, "This is for you." Li Tianlan took it and glanced at Qin Weibai subconsciously. The notebook in his hand was extremely old. It seemed to be the one that Qin Weibai had held before. Whether the content was the same or not, at least it was the same from the outside. This is, standing in the supreme realm of the Chosen One, his understanding of the Li family swordsmanship, the Wang family of Beihai swordsmanship, and the 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City. The master of Samsara Palace said slowly, "This is the martial arts belonging to the supreme realm." He killed many enemies in his life. He recorded all the martial arts that caught his eye. He also recorded his own evaluation, understanding, and coping methods, as well as his own way of using power and unique skills. These are the thoughts of the Chosen One. You can use them as a reference. Just take a look. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly trembled. He flipped through the notebook with a blank mind. The 6 paths of reincarnation sword. The 24 moves of sword. The 10th unique domain. The 30-meter mortal world. The glory of the holy hall. The shadow world. Raining sword with Jifeng. Countless unique skills that shocked the dark world flowed on the paper one by one. Li Tianlan couldn't describe his feelings. If the dark world was a bigger Jianghu, then the thing in his hand was the so-called secret book that could make all the people in Jianghu crazy. This gift could be said to be extremely heavy, so heavy that even his fingers were trembling. Li Tianlan opened his mouth. "Don't refuse." The master of Samsara Palace said slowly, "This should belong to you. It should have been given to you." Li Tianlan's expression was complicated. He still didn't know what his relationship with Dongqing Huangtu was. But the existence of the Chosen One was no longer illusory. The blue notebook in his hand was the most important evidence. The real Great Way was in his hand. Deity of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital knew that he had no hope of becoming the Chosen One, so he took another path of the 24 moves of sword. He abandoned the illusory and pursued the ultimate reality. The master of Samsara Palace said softly, "In a sense, I'm the same as him. I can also see the path of the Chosen One, but I can't control his day and night. So I only took one side and reached the present realm. But you're different. I hope you can follow the path he took and finally embark on a path that really belongs to you." Li Tianlan held the notebook and pondered for a long time. Then he said blandly, "Day and night, reality and illusion." The master of Samsara Palace nodded. "It's perfect." Li Tianlan laughed. He looked into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace and said with expectation and uneasiness that he didn't even notice, "You must live. You must live." The master of Samsara Palace took a deep look at him. His light voice seemed to come from far away, carrying with it countless emotions that seemed somewhat unfathomable because of the distance. like dark clouds drifting across the sky. "I'm leaving," she said. Chapter 568. Snow Country Mormons. Tian-Yin walked out of the ancient small castle expressionlessly. Facing the heavy rain, he did not look back. Deity looked at his back quietly, and his aura became more and more real. Since about half a year ago, every time the two met, they parted on bad terms. They had saved each other's lives more than once. They had gone through thick and thin together and fought side by side, but neither of them could persuade each other. With Tian-Yin as the leader, the cracks in the entire purgatory of heaven capital seemed to have become more and more obvious. Deity never sighed with emotion or wavered, just like his eyes when he looked at Tian-Yin's back at this moment. Apart from calmness, there was only stubbornness in his eyes. The wind and rain were like knives. Tian-Yin did not evaporate the rain around him. He walked against the heavy rain and wiped the rain off his face. It was cold and rainy in Eastern Europe, and the polar night was still the same. In the cold and dark environment, his eyes were as bright as cold stars, and he looked more and more indifferent. Daybreak, dressed in white, looked at Tian-Yin in front of the castle with a complicated look in his eyes. Tian-Yin nodded to him, but his footsteps did not stop. "How is it?" Daybreak took the initiative to ask. Tian-Yin paused and said hoarsely, "After the final battle, I will go to Tianan." In his several conversations with Deity, this was the final result. Tian-Yin was very satisfied with this result, but he definitely did not like it. He did not like this result, not at all. "Why do you have to do this?" Daybreak sighed softly. "Yes, why do you have to do this?" Tian-Yin repeated and shook his head. He walked into the wind and rain and the two passed each other. "That's for the best." "Did you think about me when you went to Tianan?" Daybreak suddenly asked. His tone was very slow, almost enunciating each word with indescribable weight. Tian-Yin's steps forward suddenly stopped. He stood in the rain. The wind and rain like knives instantly wet his whole body. After a long time, Tian-Yin said slowly, "You and I have been friends for many years. I want you to tell me the truth. Do you think His Highness did the right thing?" Daybreak had nothing to say. He shook his head. "I will not question any decision made by His Highness. Not questioning doesn't mean he is right." Tian-Yin said faintly, "Wrong is wrong. For so many years, the Li family has been holed up in the border, and people have been coming out from there to go to the purgatory of heaven capital. But has your Highness ever gone back once? Have you ever gone back even once? None of you know the life there. The Li family has suffered for so many years and been in despair for so many years. Everyone regards the young master as the Li family's future hope, a little hope squeezed out of despair. Now that I have come to the purgatory of heaven capital, he told me that the young master is not worthy, and you also think that the young master is not worthy. Ah, not worthy? The Li family has placed all its hopes on the young master for so many years. Your King telling me that he doesn't deserve it? What? Who do you think you are? What right does he have? What right do you have to say that I'm not worthy? Are you worthy? Simply preposterous." His voice was getting louder and louder. In the wind and rain, he stood in front of Daybreak, almost roaring to vent his long-suppressed emotions. Daybreak said nothing. He did not need to answer that question. Tian-Yin's every question was directed at His Highness. He was asking if His Highness was worthy. Did he deserve to deny Li Tianlan? Deity in the castle did not answer. He was quiet. Tian-Yin waited for a while and smiled self-mockingly. "I will participate in this decisive battle, which can be regarded as an end to my days in the purgatory of heaven capital. But I am just the beginning. More and more people will leave here in the purgatory of heaven capital. I have no problem with him claiming to be deity. I have no problem with him saying that the young master doesn't deserve it. But in my eyes he doesn't deserve it either. The purgatory of heaven capital doesn't deserve it." The wind and rain were absent-minded and cold. Through the rain, Tian-Yin looked at Daybreak in front of him and said in a cold and gloomy tone, "From today on, in my heart, the purgatory of heaven capital is the purgatory of heaven capital, and the Li family is the Li family. I will return to Tianan. As for you and me, if I don't die this time, we will meet in Tianan." Without saying more, he turned around and walked straight into the rain. Standing in the same place, Daybreak's eyes finally showed a touch of bitterness, even pain. Everyone in the purgatory of heaven capital knew that he was in charge of everything in Tianan, and even the entire Sanluo Hall was there. Tian-Yin went to Tianan and stood beside the so-called young master. If they met in Tianan in the future, what would it be like? What would be the position of the two of them? It was better not to see them. Daybreak took a deep breath. They were brothers who had gone through thick and thin with him. But from today on, what were they? I will break through to the invincible realm in the near future. It's better not to see each other in the future. Daybreak's deep voice sounded and fell into Tianyin's ears from all directions. He was the second expert in the purgatory of heaven capital, except for deity. He had the real combat capability of the invincible realm. With the murderous weapon Shadow the Ripper in his hand, once he broke through, the strength of the entire purgatory of heaven capital would greatly increase. Tianyin's footsteps paused, but he did not stop. In the dark world, there were very few experts who broke through to the invincible realm after the age of 40. For martial arts, 40 years old was a person's peak period, but it was also the period when one began to go downhill from the peak. But nothing was absolute. There were very few such people, but it didn't mean that there were none. After all, deity had made the achievements he had today even though his foundation was almost completely destroyed after the War of Treason. Daybreak stood where he was and watched Tianyin's back disappear. He didn't move for a long time. Come in. Deity's voice sounded in his ear. Daybreak silently turned around and walked into the castle. Deity stood alone in the hall of the castle, admiring a medieval armor placed in the hall. Hearing Daybreak's footsteps, he shook his head slightly. It's useless. He said, we all know him very well. We were able to walk together because we were like-minded. Now we have different paths and can't work together. Let him go. Do you think Tianyin is wrong? Daybreak asked after a moment of silence. Wrong? Deity smiled. We are not children anymore. How can there be right or wrong in everything in the world? There is no right or wrong in the world, but we do. Daybreak's voice trembled a little. We are on the same side. Deity was silent for a moment and said blandly, we used to be, but not anymore. He stretched out his hand and flicked the armor in front of him. The crisp sound of the collision spread throughout the castle, like the sound of a sword. Don't think too much. Deity turned around and looked at Daybreak. Business is more important. At present, there are more than 500 elites gathered in Mormons. Daybreak took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. We are all on the same side and can be completely trusted. Very good. Deity nodded. Everyone be on standby. Daybreak nodded. He hesitated for a moment and suddenly asked, we have to guard against Qin Weibai's sword. When the divine weapon of Lin En was born, Phoenix, who was nurturing her fetus in Lin En, revealed the news to Deity as soon as possible. Daybreak had already felt the power of the sword just from the oral description. Such a divine weapon was simply unheard of. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Deity had never heard of this sword. He was silent for a moment and finally shook his head. It's okay. We have to guard against it. Daybreak repeated his words. Of course, but this sword can't fall on me. Qin Weibai, that woman, except for Li Tianlan, I'm afraid she doesn't care about the whole world. If that sword is in her hands, she can only deal with Wang Tianzong. Others, including me, are probably not important in her eyes. Speaking of Qin Weibai, Daybreak raised his eyebrows. According to the intelligence, she is now in Reki City. It's almost time to come back. Deity walked to the bed and looked out of the window. The wind and rain continued. In this place where there was no sunlight for 24 hours, the darkness seemed to have become the only eternal color. The darkness, the heavy rain, everything became more and more violent, colder and more messy. Deity stared into the distance and whispered to himself, it's about to start. The morning sun rose on Mount Dibbing. Summer Solstice, who was dressed in splendid clothes, solemnly walked out of the laboratory with a huge wooden box in her hands. In many cases, Firmament, who could represent the Wang family of Beihai in the dark world, stood outside respectfully. As soon as Summer Solstice came out, Firmament's eyes fell on the wooden box in her hand. The huge wooden box was nearly 3 meters long and 1 meter wide. It was black and extremely heavy. Firmament's eyes suddenly became fanatical, and his body even began to tremble slightly. Summer Solstice handed the wooden box in her hand to Firmament and said calmly, take it to Eastern Europe and give it to Tianzong. This is... Jiu? Firmament's voice was messy and in a trance. This is the coldness of 9 states. Summer Solstice whispered, the first divine weapon in the dark world. Firmament took a deep breath and carefully held the wooden box. For a moment he did not dare to move. You go now. Summer Solstice said calmly, the private plane is ready. Go now. I'll go too. A voice suddenly sounded, warm and peaceful. Summer Solstice raised her eyebrows and turned her head. In her sight, a slender young man walked over with his back to the morning sun. The sun shone on him. Vaguely, every pore on his body seemed to be emitting a faint fire. Summer Solstice blinked. The young man walked up to her and whispered, "Mom, I'll go." "Xingxiao you?" Summer Solstice looked at Wang Xingxiao in a daze. For a moment she felt that her son was a little strange. Since the final maneuver, Wang Xingxiao, who was known as the heavenly son of Beihai, had been silent on Mount Dibing. His sword strike at the cost of his realm was still easily defeated. No one knew what he had experienced in his heart after such a crushing defeat. On the day when the coldness of 9 states was cast, there was movement for the first time in the place where Wang Xingxiao was silent and meditating. It was not until today that he really came out. At this moment, Wang Xingxiao seemed to be no different from usual, but Summer Solstice always felt that there was something different about him. "I'll go to Eastern Europe with Firmament." Wang Xingxiao repeated his request calmly. "But you're only—" Summer Solstice frowned. She wanted to say that he was only in the fire-flaming realm now, but as soon as she said it, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. Now Wang Xingxiao was indeed still in the fire-flaming realm. But the fire-flaming realm could no longer represent his current strength. In Summer Solstice's perception, the current Wang Xingxiao was completely a ball of fire. He looked gentle and calm, but he was always burning. Every flame was unimaginably hot and violent. At this moment, a word suddenly came to Summer Solstice's mind. "Rebirth from the fire." "How's your strength now?" Summer Solstice suddenly asked. Wang Xingxiao thought about it seriously and said frankly, "I'm still no match for Li Tianlan." He paused and continued, "I mean Li Tianlan in the final maneuver state." Summer Solstice was silent for a moment. It was not long before the first day of the final maneuver. But now, Li Tianlan was obviously stronger than he was at the beginning. "You may not know yet." Summer Solstice whispered, "During this time Jiang Shangyu kept breaking the realm overnight. Now he is a superior a half step to the invincible realm." Wang Xingxiao raised his eyebrows and said, "I knew he was not simple." He knew what his mother meant, so he thought about it and said, "It's okay. Even if I can't beat him now, he can't beat me." He reached out his hand. A tiny flame appeared in his hand. The flame seemed weak, but it was beating very violently and endlessly. Summer Solstice's eyes lit up. That was the real emotion of amazement. Firmament's body tightened subconsciously. Looking at the flame in Wang Xingxiao's hand, his eyes were extremely solemn. Wang Xingxiao's tone was a little emotional and a little complicated. "The 4 realms of martial arts have delayed me for many years. It's good that you can figure it out." Summer Solstice smiled. At this moment, it seemed that even the rising sun had dimmed a little. She took a step forward, tidied her son's collar and whispered, "Go ahead. Be careful." Wang Xingxiao nodded, hugged Summer Solstice gently and turned around. Firmament handed the huge wooden box in his hand to Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao took it. The huge wooden box shook slightly with a happy emotion. Wang Xingxiao and Firmament went straight down the mountain and rushed to the airport at the foot of the mountain. There, the silver-gray special plane with the metal of Firmament and sea engraved on the fuselage was ready. They would go directly to Eastern Europe. The whole of Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong, and the whole Dark World. Everyone was waiting for this sword. Summer Solstice turned and walked to her residence. Among her favorite flowers and plants, there was a crystal-clear jade Guanyin statue. Summer Solstice knelt in front of Guanyin, put her palms together and looked extremely pious. She closed her eyes and whispered, "It's about to start." Reki City, the office of the president. Countless elites of the Snowdance Corps quietly surrounded the area of hundreds of meters around Wang Tianzong. Tribulation stood in front of the office of the president, his eyes focused. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Phantom Yin and Yang. Li Zhonghu, Li Wangxing, Hua Qingfeng, high-level officials appeared behind Tribulation one by one. Everyone was looking at the room in the ruins. Under the wind and rain, the room seemed to come alive and was trembling slightly as if it was breathing. The sword intent all over the sky whistled in the room every time it trembled, sweeping through the night and driving the wind. The raindrops were completely torn apart by the sword intent. The tiny water droplets did not fall, but hung in the sky with the sword intent. There were more and more broken raindrops, and the water droplets were densely suspended in every corner of the office of the president. The room was still trembling slightly. In everyone's sight, the room was becoming more and more blurred and distant. No one could see the room anymore. No one could see Wang Tianzong either. In the blurry world there seemed to be something. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Something was happening. It was slow and firm but unstoppable. In the room, under the dim light, Wang Tianzong was still practicing calligraphy. His handwriting was getting fewer and fewer. And it was still decreasing. I'm the first among all the ambitious and ruthless people. There were no more eternal people. The ambitious and ruthless people were also disappearing. The handwriting finally had no you and me. Only the first one was left. Wang Tianzong's movements became more and more natural. The tip of the brush in his hand wandered on the white paper. At a certain moment he no longer seemed to be practicing calligraphy. He seemed to have no strength at all and was as light as a feather. Only the brush, which seemed to be able to tear the whole world, was still wandering, driving his whole body and will. Sublimation. Upward. And to the peak again. In the increasingly blurred scene, an elite of the Snowdance Corps who was guarding the outermost periphery of the square walked in. He held a letter in his hand. He handed the envelope to the low-level officer above him. The low-level officer handed it to the middle-level officer, and the middle-level officer handed it to the high-level officer. The letter finally fell into the hands of Cool Breeze. Cool Breeze held the letter, and an ominous premonition suddenly surged up. His palm trembled subconsciously. He was not the recipient of the letter. The recipient of the letter was Tribulation. He hesitated and exchanged a look with Drifting Cloud. What's wrong? Tribulation's hoarse voice sounded. He turned his head. Cool Breeze subconsciously shrank his palm, then said with a wry smile, nothing. Tribulation's eyes fell on the letter in Cool Breeze's hand. For me? Tribulation asked. Cool Breeze's face darkened, and the ominous premonition in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Give it to me. Tribulation stretched out his hand. Your Highness, Cool Breeze opened his mouth. Give it to me. Tribulation repeated. Cool Breeze gritted his teeth and handed the envelope in his hand to Tribulation. Tribulation looked at the envelope, narrowed his eyes and opened it casually. In the wind and rain, a photo was pulled out of the envelope by Tribulation. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud looked a little confused. There was a woman in the photo. She was dressed in a white dress and had a delicate body. This was originally a woman who could be said to be devastatingly beautiful, but at this moment, half of her face was swollen. A deep scar ran from her chin all the way to her back, completely destroying the beauty of her face and making her look incomparably hideous. Droplets of blood splattered on her white dress as she stared blankly in front of her. Desperate and helpless. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud didn't know this woman, nor did they know what this photo was trying to show. Tribulation lowered his head and looked at it quietly. His eyes were cold and calm, so deep that there wasn't the slightest fluctuation in them. But this photo seemed to carry an unattainable weight. It slipped from his hand and fell into the wind and rain. The back of the photo appeared in Tribulation's sight. It was a line of Chinese characters. It was crooked, but every stroke carried a strong sense of anger and domineering. My glory is in Mormons. Heretic, come and die. Heretic. There was only one force in the world that could use this word. The Vatican. And there was only one person in the whole Vatican who was qualified and confident to let Tribulation go and die. Saint War Angel Arceus. But why did the Vatican believe that Tribulation would pass just based on this photo? Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud frowned. Almost at the same time, they thought of a message that no one in Sai City mentioned, but everyone had heard of. White dress. White dress. Holy Virgin Angel. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud's expressions changed. Your Highness. Cool Breeze called tentatively. Tribulation didn't speak or move. He kept his head down and looked at the photo in the rain. His aura was disappearing. All his vitality began to converge and finally there was nothing left. That was the extreme of the whole person. He was desperately converging and finally became barren. Cool Breeze subconsciously reached out and touched Tribulation. Your Highness? He didn't finish his words. His palm passed through Tribulation's chest. Tribulation's figure began to twist and shake. He didn't know when it stopped where he was but a shadow. Cool Breeze, whose face changed dramatically, was about to turn around. In the room Wang Tianzong's stroke fell again. There was only one word. One word was like a sword. In an instant the hazy and violent sword energy broke through the room. A circular ripple swept across the whole square in the most fierce and arrogant manner, and finally went straight into the night sky. The vast and endless sword energy was like a dragon, surging like a tide. The hazy and clear sword light was endless, and it directly broke the whole sky. Wherever his vision passed, the entire sky was shattering, and black ripples appeared one after another in the transparent space. The messy rainwater seemed to fall from countless worlds, but it was shattered by the sword intent, turning into ice crystals one after another. There were more and more ice crystals. From top to bottom, they spread out in all directions and covered the whole square in an instant. With Wang Tianzong's room as the center, countless ice crystals with sword intent continued to spread out. Cool breeze kept turning around and froze in place. Drifting cloud stretched out his palm and froze. Li Zhonghu raised his head in confusion. Hua Qingfeng was frowning. The yin and yang phantom seemed to want to take a step. Tribulation's shadow was twisting. It froze. All froze. Tens of thousands of people, the whole square, and the whole Snowdance Corps were completely frozen in an instant. In other words, they were directly imprisoned in place by the unimaginable majestic sword energy. The whole square was dead silent in an instant. Everyone kept the posture of that moment, motionless. Only the sword intent was still whistling between heaven and earth and kept spinning. In the room, Wang Tianzong raised his head and looked to the south. His sight seemed to cross Eastern Europe, Snow Country, the vast Beihai, and fell on Mount Dibing. The sun was rising there. The flowers were blooming there. As the breeze passed, the birds were singing and the flowers were fragrant. There were mountains and rivers, laughter, and people lived and worked in peace and contentment. The Wang family of Beihai had lived for hundreds of years because of the glory and brilliance brought by being invincible in the world. But now, at this moment, this night, the new glory was right under his feet. Wang Tianzong looked in that direction. His eyes were full of undisguised attachment and love, so heavy and affectionate. He would sweep through this era. Then he would return there and continue to rush to the highest peak with the Wang family of Beihai. He would go back. He must go back. Wang Tianzong clenched his fists. He looked at the island and the mountain in Beihai and whispered, "Wait for me." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 569. Under the wind and rain, Reki City was full of lights. Before the banquet in the Manlisai Hotel began, Wulan State and Zhongzhou State finally began to sign agreements one by one. Riker and Li Huaqing sat opposite each other. The hall was full of flashing cameras. Almost all the important figures in the two countries were witnessing this scene. The repeated signatures fell on different agreements. The entire Wulan State began to change quietly in the ignorance and cheers of all the people. Countless interests entered Zhongzhou State with these agreements. The world's most powerful hegemon country crushed over with undisguised toughness and sharpness. Sovereignty, reputation, freedom, hope, interests, and future. Everything began to break apart. Riker was expressionless. His palms were trembling violently, his mind was blank and he was dizzy. He signed one name after another purely by instinct. After tonight, the former Wulan State would completely become a thing of the past. Everything in the future of this country would fall on him. He would be a sinner throughout the ages. Riker smiled absent-mindedly and signed his name on the last agreement. There was a round of applause around him, which was extremely ironic. The applause surrounded the entire training ground, and it was so lively that it was even a little absurd. The sun fell near noon. The clear and firm voice seemed to echo in everyone's ears. People clapped subconsciously and their thoughts were in a mess. On the high platform, the enchanting and solemn short-haired woman walked down in everyone's eyes. She walked to the group of students of the Sky Academy. In an instant, almost all the students stood up and applauded desperately. The applause was fanatical. That day was the graduation ceremony of the Sky Academy. After Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy, and Chen Songlin, the dean of the Deep Sea Academy, respectively delivered their speeches, the representative of the East Emperor Palace, as a dark horse in the maneuver of the two academies, came to the stage and generally stated the plan of the East Emperor Palace for the next 3 years. This was the result of the East Emperor Palace's deliberate courtesy. Whether it was Zhuang Huayang of the Sky Academy or Chen Songlin of the Deep Sea Academy, both of them were generals. The real leader of the East Emperor Palace was now the marshal who represented Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe to expand the territory of the motherland. He fought unhindered and his spirit was amazing. He would rather die than retreat. After the end of the first day of the final maneuver, the young man who had shocked the dark world had reached one high point after another. This was not just a rise but a meteoric rise. If he were here today, Zhuang Huayang and Chen Songlin might not have the chance to speak first. At least Chen Songlin would be behind Li Tianlan. The representative of East Emperor Palace was Wang Yuetong. In the uproar, no one had recovered from Wang Yuetong's identity. The former little princess of the Wang family of Beihai had already announced the future direction of the East Emperor Palace, Tianan City. It was not until this moment that the entire Zhongzhou state discovered the true situation in Tianan. The border control corps fell into the hands of the Wang family of Beihai, but the more than 100,000 troops of the Blood Battalion close to Tianan were still in the hands of the Dongqing clan. Ning Ziyuan, who supported the Li family and was eventually transferred from the Eastern Theater of Operations, was now the commander of the Tianan Freedom Corps. As for the Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters, Shu Mountain was the banker. Dongqing Rushili Badian Ning Qianqing. The three members of East Emperor Palace had been completely connected with Tianan. After returning from Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan stood in Tianan, and the support behind him was endless. What did this mean? After leaving a deep mark in Eastern Europe, the young marshal of the Li family had obviously made up his mind to leave his footprint in Tianan. It was not Jiangxia, the sphere of influence of the Li family. It was not Liaodong, the territory of Sai City. It was not Zhongyuan, the base camp of the Dongqing clan. It was Tianan. The land of more than 40,000 square kilometers, which had no clear ownership, was a bit backward. A land of rivers and mountains was picturesque. Wang Yuetong walked into the spectator stand of the students and shook hands with hundreds of students who had confirmed to join East Emperor Palace. They would leave Huading soon and go to Tianan. That was Li Tianlan's choice. He had chosen an incomparably broad stage filled with carnage, deceit, intrigue, and slaughter. However, in the darkness that was mixed with blood, there was the brightest future and prospects for everyone. On this day, only Wang Yuetong came to the stage from East Emperor Palace, but hundreds of people stood at the same time. They were the most elite of the young generation in the past 3 years. They followed East Emperor Palace and went far away. Everyone was looking at this scene and everyone saw a different meaning in this scene. Complicated emotions spread on the training ground of Sky Academy. Most people thought of Eastern Europe. On this day in Eastern Europe, the old era had just passed. On the same day in Zhongzhou State, a new era had begun. From beginning to end, Gu Xingyun, the so-called god of war in Zhongzhou State, had never appeared on the scene. Snow Country. In the Grand Palace, the president of Snow Country, who was born in the Violet family, received a man who was as strong as a giant with surprise. The man was tall and his gray clothes looked a little dirty. His face was covered with countless tiny scars, and he looked extremely embarrassed. But he stood in the palace with his own momentum. Inside and outside the palace, all the palace warriors knelt on one knee. He had always been strong internationally. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The president of Snow Country, who was even a little overbearing, strode over and gave the giant a big hug. Welcome back. The tone of the president of Snow Country, Jia Delin, was sincere and emotional. This is my world. As long as I don't die, I will come back no matter what. The voice of the giant man was steady and thick. The president laughed heartily. For a moment, the compromise and concession that he had thought about before completely disappeared in his heart and turned into passion and heroism. He was the leader of this fighting nation, so of course he should have a stronger desire to fight than anyone else. He looked at the giant in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What do you want?" "I want to get my things back." The giant's tone was flat. President Jia Delin hesitated for a moment and then said decisively, "Of course, it belongs to you. I also want the polar bear." The giant's voice became deeper and deeper. "I need his strength." In the hearts of countless people in the dark world, the polar bear of Snow Country was not a big animal that lived in the polar region and was extremely ferocious but looked a little cute after being tamed. Instead, it was a cutting-edge force that was always protected by Snow Country and rarely used. That was the most elite force of the entire military of Snow Country. The military of Zhongzhou State had the most elite and most terrifying Thunderbolt battalion. But under the Thunderbolt there were also the Bloody Massacre, Black Dragon, Pegasus, and Polar Bear. In a sense, was the trump card of Snow Country. This was a force that could dominate the world. However, very few people knew that the so-called Polar Bear unit was actually 2 units. The former was the Arctic. The latter was the Bear. What the giant wanted was the Arctic Army and the Bear Army. President Jia Delin took a deep look at him and said without hesitation, "Yes." The giant nodded and said, "Thank you." "No problem." President Jia Delin's voice was serious and cold. "At this time I can give you whatever you want. But the question is, what can you give me?" "Order." The giant's tone was calm. "I can give you order, an order that only belongs to our own people. Snow Country only belongs to the people of Snow Country. His voice covered the whole palace. All the palace warriors were shocked at the same time. The giant turned around and looked at the orderly figures of the warriors in the palace. He said calmly, "Who dares to fight with me?" There was a slight silence in the grand palace for a moment. In the next second, a furious, earth-shattering roar suddenly rang out, shaking the skies. "Fight!" Jia Delin's expression became more and more serious. His eyes gradually became bloodshot. "Can I trust you?" Compared to others. The giant looked into his eyes and did not give in at all. "I am more trustworthy than them." Jia Delin nodded and reached out his hand. "Your Highness, please." The giant walked into the palace hall. From this moment on, the accurate and conclusive news, centered on the palace of Snow Country, spread directly throughout the whole country, and then rushed out of Eastern Europe and continued to stir around the world. This was the official channel of the whole Snow Country, or rather, the ultimatum. On the night of August 24th in Eastern Europe, President Jia Delin of Snow Country personally signed the battle leader. The Arctic Army. All the elites of the Bear Army. President Jia Delin, in the name of Snow Country, officially declared war on all the dark forces staying in Eastern Europe. Snow Country asked all forces to withdraw from Eastern Europe within 3 days. Otherwise there would be a real war. The Polar Bear Army, which had been silent for a long time, reappeared in front of the world. And these two forces which dominated the world now had a new leader. Fregalus, the chief marshal of Snow Country's military headquarters. Many people in the Dark World had never heard of this name, but probably no one would be unfamiliar with his code name in the Dark World. The leader of the Polar Ground Alliance. Tyrant. Late at night that day, Tyrant, who had been missing for a long time, reappeared in the palace of Snow Country. He took the leader of the president and rolled up the vanguard in the capital of Snow Country. He went straight to Mormons. The headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance was there. The news was passed on quickly. On this night that was destined to be unusual, many things were brewing quickly and finally taking shape. The whole of Eastern Europe began to take action in the chaos like never before. All the countries, all the high-level officials, all the wealthy families. Everyone was moving. Different positions, different demands, and different expectations directly erupted into a huge collision after a short period of brewing. The aftermath of the collision began to spread throughout Eastern Europe. President Jia Delin of Snow Country had convened several heads of state for a conference call. In Reki City, many patriarchs of wealthy families were nervously waiting for Li Tianlan's final reply. The grand banquet had begun. The agreement that had just been signed was sent back to Yuzhou as soon as possible under the cover of the army. The plane passed through the clouds. Under the clear sky, Wang Xingxiao, who was holding the sword box, became more and more calm and indifferent. In the hotel in Reki City, Li Huaqing received a call and directly threw the cup in his hand in anger. In the hospital, Situt Sangyue was restless. In the ward next door, Qin Dongqiao was talking with his younger brother Qin Shilai about the past. Raphael, the leader of the Dark Knights, was still in a coma, but he gradually showed signs of waking up. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Li Shi walked through the streets and alleys of Im and continued to move forward. The bus ran in the dark and Mormons was getting closer and closer. Wang Tianzong began to practice calligraphy again. The vehicle cut through the wind and rain in the dark. Tribulation held the steering wheel tightly. The engine was roaring wildly, and his eyes were completely dead. There was silence in the square. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were imprisoned in the square like statues. The elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to gather toward the castle where deity was. In the church, Arcis, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, looked at Holy Virgin Angel, who was tied to the cross and covered in blood, and was roaring hysterically. Angel's face was numb. Several burly saint warriors pounced on her with a grim smile and tore apart her long dress. Angel, who had been disheartened for a long time, began to struggle desperately. With a scream, a thick steel needle directly pierced her delicate wrist and nailed her arm to the cross. The white dress was torn to pieces and kept flying. All the beauty began to be torn apart in the final madness, broken and finally desperate. Lin Fengting redetermined the movements of some of the elites of the Lin clan in the manor. In the manor with birds singing and flowers fragrant, the dense fog had begun to rise uncontrollably. The door of the hall of the castle was closed. Deity, dressed in a wide robe, took off his shoes, stood on the ground and began to meditate. In Lin and City, Li Honghe stood on the mountain, looking in the direction of Eastern Europe and was muttering to himself. At the junction of Snow Country and I'm Jiang Shangyu, who had disappeared, was holding a bottle of wine, looking out of the window at the wind and rain and smiling carefreely. At the airport of Huading, Wang Yuetong had already boarded the plane with the members of the East Emperor Palace. All over the world. Beautiful, cruel, urgent, cold, proud and desperate. This era, the next era, the young and the older generation. Everyone and everything began to converge crazily. Outside Reki City in the continuous rain, a black vehicle drove over. The master of Samsara Palace put on a black mask and a black cloak. Flaming Fire stood beside the master of Samsara Palace and looked at Li Tianlan. Her eyes trembled violently. Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's hand and said softly, "I'm leaving. Remember what you promised me. You will take me to Tianan." Li Tianlan nodded with a smile and touched her hair. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace and said solemnly, "Stay alive." The master of Samsara Palace did not speak, just looked at him quietly. Her eyes were deep and calm, so deep that they seemed to be able to accommodate all emotions. From now on, she spoke slowly, her voice difficult and hoarse. But as she spoke, her voice became smooth, steady, and a little cold. "Be careful." Li Tianlan did not answer but repeated again, "Stay alive." The master of Samsara Palace waved her hand, turned around and walked into the black car. Qin Weibai put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and kissed him. Then she got into the car. Flaming Fire stood by the car and looked at Li Tianlan for a long time before she slowly turned around. The black car started. The wind and rain scattered between heaven and earth. The car lights were getting farther and farther away and finally became extremely faint. Li Tianlan watched quietly and for a moment he seemed to be at a loss. In the moving car, Flaming Fire looked at the master of Samsara Palace through the rearview mirror with a complicated look in her eyes. In the wind and rain that they had been walking for a long time, the master of Samsara Palace suddenly said, "Stop the car." There was a flash of light in Flaming Fire's eyes, and she stepped on the brake immediately. The master of Samsara Palace opened the door and looked at the road. The world was filled with wind, rain, and darkness. The road was far away. Vaguely, in a trance, there seemed to be a person standing in the wind and rain, motionless. The master of Samsara Palace took a step forward subconsciously. Her foot fell and she finally froze on the spot. At this moment in the night he stood far away from her and she stood far away from him. The distance was not very far. Separated by darkness and wind and rain, it was as far as a natural moat. The master of Samsara Palace stood there looking at the night deeply. She still had a lot to say. But she couldn't say a word. Under the night, the two people stood far away from each other looking at each other. Like joy, like sadness. Like thinking, like forgetting. At this moment, no one knew what she was thinking. Time seemed to have passed in a moment but also like thousands of years. The master of Samsara Palace moved her body, turned around and walked back into the car. "Let's go," she said slowly and closed her eyes. There seemed to be liquid sliding down her face and it was extremely cold through the metal mask. Flaming Fire drove without saying a word. But at some point she bit her lip hard and her eyes were red from crying. "This fool," she cursed with a sobbing voice. The master of Samsara Palace smiled and she seemed to be a little tired. She reached out and held Qin Weibai's palm, saying softly, "Everything in the world is the hardest to be yourself." Qin Weibai bit her lip and nodded, and her eyes were slightly red. The master of Samsara Palace looked ahead and didn't look back. Mormons was thousands of miles away from her sight. That was the end of everything. Her end. The wind and rain were howling. She leaned against the seat and with an unparalleled weight she was getting closer and closer to the end. It was coming to an end. There must be an end. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 570. The sky was getting darker and darker. The polar ice wind in Mormons, which was colder than that in Reki City, blew into the church, but it did not wake up the people in the church. The fanatical atmosphere full of desire was getting higher and higher. Some crazy gasps and low roars became the only melody in the church. The solid wooden cross had been completely dyed red with blood. The white dress, which represented transcendental holiness, had been completely torn apart. The blood-stained cloth was scattered around the cross, and the blood was dripping. On the cross, the woman whose limbs had been pierced by steel nails looked pale and numb. Countless disgusting liquids covered her body. She was naked. Her once white and tender body was so beautiful that no one dared to look at it directly. Bruises were everywhere on her body. Her once noble holiness was destroyed and shattered, and the final outcome was so desperate and cruel. The woman's eyes turned slightly and she looked at Arsis, who had been standing in the hall. The tall Arsis looked at her coldly. His eyes were cold, resentful, and happy. Another group of saint warriors hurriedly took off their clothes and rushed up. Their crazy voices, which were almost irrational, sounded. The whole hall had become the best place to vent their animal desires. No one could describe this feeling. It was absurd and comfortable to the bone. After all, at this moment, the person who was being wantonly insulted and played with under their bodies was the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Just thinking about this kind of feeling was enough to make these saint warriors, who had firm beliefs, lose their minds. Groups of saint warriors went up and came down over and over again. The cross had been completely dyed red with blood. Angel's body was nailed to it and she suffered countless ravages. Her expression did not change and she just looked at Arsis quietly. There was no emotion in her eyes, only numbness and dullness. It was the despair of her entire soul being completely destroyed. The disgusting liquid flowed down with the blood. The strange smell in the hall was almost unbearable. Arsis took 2 steps forward and came to Angel. "Do you regret it?" He looked into her eyes. This is what you deserve. You betrayed the Vatican and your own faith. You will fall into hell and accompany the devil. Are you satisfied with such an ending? A glimmer of light gradually appeared in Angel's eyes. For her, it was like being cut into pieces by 1,000 knives. Her voice rang out in the slightly dark hall, and she enunciated clearly. "I have brought this upon myself, but what about you? What's the difference between your actions and the devil's?" She spoke in Chinese. As the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, she had been thinking about speaking Chinese and Mandarin for many years. Arisis's eyes suddenly flashed with rage. "Pa!" He slapped Angel hard in the face. Blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth, and Arisis's face was ferocious. "Speak human language, you bitch. You will go to hell." Angel laughed bitterly. "Everything I do is for the benefit of the Vatican. Maybe I have selfish motives, but I have always been clear about my position. Arsis, you have fallen. You are not worthy of the title of Saint War Angel." "Not worthy?" Arsis suddenly reached out and grabbed Angel's chin. He roared somewhat crazily, "You say I am not worthy? What about you? While you were being played with by that filthy, lowly assassin, have you ever thought that you are the Holy Virgin of the Vatican? In the 1,000-year history of the Vatican, you are the lowliest Holy Virgin. You are simply a disgrace to the Vatican. I heard that you have that heretic's child? Do you like men very much? How about now? You now have dozens of men who have slept with you. Do you feel good?" He slapped Angel's face hard and said coldly, "I am not an angel, but you are not a Holy Virgin either. You are just a lowly whore." "I love him." Angel's voice was weak. "But I have never given up my own position. Arsis, what do people like you know?" Arsis really did not understand. Because Angel was too weak and her voice was soft, he did not even understand the meaning of Angel's words. This damn woman until now was still speaking Chinese, which he was not very familiar with. "I have informed him." Arsis said coldly, "If he cares about you, he will come here. So you are very lucky. Before he appears, you will not die. During this period you will still have many men. Enjoy it. Your Highness Holy Virgin, I will catch him and crucify him with you on the cross. You should all be purified." Angel's body moved. Just as she was about to speak, a sigh suddenly sounded. This sigh with incomparably complex emotions was deep and old. For a moment, it seemed to pull everyone's soul into it. Everyone, including Arsis, froze on the spot for a moment with confused eyes. In the hall that exuded a subtle stench, the Pope in white walked in. "Are you from the North Island?" "I am from the Northeast." "Northeast?" "Northeast of Zhongzhou State." "I haven't been to Zhongzhou State yet. My name is Ariel from Italos. My name is Situ. This is my surname. Goodbye." "What a coincidence. Haven't you left yet?" Do you also like cherry blossoms?" "No." "Then what are you looking at?" "Looking at the sea." "The sea in the North Island is not beautiful. The other side of the sea is beautiful." "Oh, I don't like it there. I don't like that mountain." "People in Italos don't like that mountain. I don't like it very much either." "I've been very happy these days. See you tomorrow." "I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" "Oh, Zhongzhou State? I don't seem to be very welcome there. But I think I will go there." But Chinese is very difficult. Can you teach me? I'm leaving. You can take me with you. I'll learn Chinese from you. I can't. Goodbye. Under the setting sun, the sunlight of the North Island shone from the sea level and fell on the cherry tree. The pure and beautiful woman watched his back gradually go away and suddenly said, "Actually, my name is Angel." The figure paused. "My name is Situ Wanjia." "Oh, Situ, we are friends?" "They want to kill me." "What?" "My identity can represent a lot of things. They want my identity." Again. "Look at the cherry blossoms, your favorite." The petals of the cherry blossoms fluttered in the wind. In the morning after the rain, the world was full of clear light. She sat under the tree, looking a little haggard with a breathtaking beauty. After a long time she said softly, "But I want to go back." The silent and sharp young man looked at the sea in the north. After a long time he said faintly, "Then go back. I'll take you." "Oh, Holy Virgin?" "Sorry, you don't have to say sorry." The Holy Land was in front of them. From the North Island to the Holy Land, across mountains and rivers, across the plains and over the sea, countless warriors with firm faith fell. After nearly half a year of traveling and wandering several times, the young man and woman finally arrived at Italos in the Holy Land. The man looked extremely tired, but the light in his eyes became sharper and sharper. "You are the missing Holy Virgin of the Vatican." "Sorry, the woman's voice trembled. The man turned around slowly and said calmly, "Goodbye." "No. That's the Holy Land where I grew up. I am the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. It has always been my dream to return. I have no choice. I can understand that the Holy Land has arrived. I should go. Your Highness Angel." "Don't call me Your Highness. Call me by my name." In the cold silence, the woman, who could reach the peak with only one step forward, looked back at the Holy Land, her eyes in a trance. "I have always wanted to come back because my dream is here." But at this time the dream was so illusory. Only the man in front of her, who had stood in front of her countless times in the past 6 months, was so real. She returned to the Holy Land. "But now, I want to leave here. Situ, take me away, okay?" "Okay." "Your Majesty, let him go, please." "Your Highness Angel, don't forget your identity. He is my friend Arsis. You are not qualified to interfere with my privacy." "Ridiculous. The Holy Virgin has no privacy. I don't want to be the Holy Virgin. I don't want. If you don't be the Holy Virgin, he will die." "This is blasphemy. Purify this heretic. He kidnapped the Holy Virgin. He deserves to die." No, I beg you, let him go." The engine roared to the limit in the wind and rain. The night retreated rapidly, and the vehicle went straight from the road to the highway. At the maximum speed, the off-road vehicle with the pass of the Snowdance Corps directly passed through the border of Wulan State. Tribulation's eyes became more and more silent. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the vehicle officially entered the border of Im. The engine roared, which was almost overloaded, continued. The vehicle rushed in the wind and rain, and countless memories flashed through his mind. "Greetings, Your Highness. You are?" "I'm Situ Tsangyue's younger brother." "Younger brother. I'm Tribulation." "Oh, the little guy back then, I've seen you. Why are you here?" "I want to become stronger." The calm voice was with unimaginable stubbornness and paranoia, like the growl of an injured beast. "There are many ways to become stronger. But it's only with you that I can find the fastest and most effective method. My martial arts are very special." "Why do you want to become stronger?" "I just want to bring her back." He said she wanted to go with me. He said she wanted to see the cherry blossoms in the North Island. "Where is she?" The other party didn't ask who she was, just where she was. In the old man's mind, it didn't matter who the other party was at all. "Into the Holy Land." The 3 simple words seemed to carry great weight. He slowly opened his mouth and said it with great difficulty. "The Holy Land. You want to take away their Holy Virgin? Or a candidate for the Holy Virgin? Or a certain core god's punishment priest? No matter who it is, in my current state, if I go all out to face Arsis and the Pope in the Holy Land, I should have a 70% chance to bring her back. But if it's you, I'm afraid it will take many years. Your Highness is willing to help me? I can't take action. Otherwise, what will happen to the remaining soldiers behind me? I heard that Your Highness has the map of God of War in your hand, which can be the fastest. That's the invincible manual. You may die. I've already died once. When I was in the Holy Land, please help me, Your Highness. I can give you the invincible manual. What can you give me? As long as I have it, I'm willing to give everything. Everything? Everything. I don't want everything from you, but I want your position. There has been a rumor in the world that Your Highness had set up many backups before the collapse of the Li family. Among them, the 7 stars should be the leader. If the rumor is true, Tribulation is willing to be one of the 7 stars. The 7 stars already have a candidate. You don't need to worry. If you want, from today on, your code name in the Li family is Arctic. What am I going to do? In a few years, if there is a suitable opportunity, I hope you can take care of my grandson outside. The old man pointed forward. Through the dense forest, in the farthest distance of sight, a child stood there vaguely. He held a sword in one hand. Under the scorching sun, he was as still as a sculpture. This is my grandson Li Tianlan. Tribulation's eyes fell on the phone. Countless pictures in his memory surged like a tide. They were broken, messy, clear, and vague. He picked up the phone and found Li Tianlan's phone number. He hesitated for a moment and finally did not dial. In the early morning of August 25th, the black off-road vehicle rushed across the border of Im and continued to move forward, all the way north. The cold current of the Arctic Ocean was whistling in the wind and rain. The darkness ahead was getting deeper and deeper. The vehicle entered snow country and moved forward all the way. It was already a polar night in the northern area of snow country. The wind and rain were like a waterfall, constantly sprinkling between heaven and earth. Tribulation's eyes became more and more focused. The serious injury in his body began to be suppressed little by little, at all costs. He no longer thought about what would happen in the future. At this moment, Tribulation was shuttling wildly in the shadow, with only concentration in his mind. This was the strongest tribulation. He no longer thought about the future tribulation. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the black off-road vehicle entered the northernmost part of snow country, less than 100 kilometers away from Mormons. Tribulation suddenly felt a little regretful. In this world of ice and snow, there were no cherry blossoms, her favorite. Even he was not the same as before. And like this, he also failed to fulfill his promise to the old man. He finally picked up the mobile phone and dialed the number. The phone was slowly connected in a short silence. A soft but somewhat surprised voice sounded on the other end of the phone. Can you still make phone calls? Sister? Tribulation was silent for a moment and whispered, do me a favor. Setut Sangyue seemed to be a little stunned and did not speak for a while. From now on, help me take care of Tianlan. This is my promise to the Li family. Where are you? There seemed to be something cold connecting the two ends of the phone in an instant. Setut Sangyue's voice became extremely calm in an instant. Tribulation held the phone and drove faster and faster. He shook his head and whispered, Sister, I'm sorry. The phone was hung up. In the crazy roar of the engine, Tribulation, who was full of regret and concentration, threw away the phone and the mask on his face. The face, which was no longer young, faced the wind and rain outside the window and rushed directly to Mormons in the most decisive manner. Without hesitation. Chapter 571. In the dim light, Angel's eyes moved with effort. Her gaze fell on the Pope's face. The Pope's face was as gentle as ever, and his eyes were filled with sighs and pity. Angel's body moved, and the steel nails in her limbs felt a sharp pain. Her somewhat blurred consciousness woke up in the pain. Ah, Your Majesty the Pope. Her voice was hoarse and weak. Do you regret it, Angel? The Pope asked slowly, and the pity in his eyes grew deeper and deeper. I want to regret. What do I regret? Angel asked softly. The Pope did not speak. Angel's breathing was a little short and she said with difficulty, I just don't understand what I did wrong. We got nothing in Eastern Europe and it was all because of you. Angel, you betrayed the Vatican. The Pope's tone was still calm. That's not betrayal. I just did what I thought was right. Phew. You can't kill Paul. Your Majesty, whether the Vatican is willing to admit it or not, it's a fact. With our strength, we can't afford to offend Zhongzhou state. The Pope looked at her without saying a word. Now, it's too late. Angel murmured to herself. No one can control everything. The Pope tidied up his white robe and said blandly, I can understand your feelings when you destroyed Arisus's coronation, and I can also understand your thoughts at that time. But in fact, everything that happened after you destroyed his coronation was beyond your expectations. Arsus was hypnotized and used the redemption in advance. In the battle known as the Trial Day, the Vatican had almost no effect. Paul and King Tong did not die, and we had no interest in Eastern Europe. In this chaos, we suffered a crushing defeat. If Arsis was at his peak, it might have been another result now. I understand your original intention, but the reality is that all this is because you destroyed his coronation. That's not my intention. Angel was silent for a moment, then sighed and said, I overestimated Arsis. The Pope's eyes flashed with a touch of humor and bitterness in an instant. He shook his head and did not speak. Angel had indeed overestimated Arsis. As one of the few experts at the peak of the invincible realm in the Dark World, compared with the others, Arisis's aptitude was not very outstanding. He had exhausted all his potential to barely break through to the peak of the invincible realm. It could even be said that he had overdrawn all his potential. He was known as the best in close combat in the Dark World, but his willpower was always a little weak, which was also his recognized weakness. But before that, except for the Pope, no one had thought that Arisis's will would be so fragile. According to Angel's estimation, even if she destroyed the coronation, the other party's will should be far beyond that of an ordinary invincible realm expert. At most, it should be a little worse than that of a peak invincible realm expert. Except for the Pope, who could hypnotize such a person. However, after Arisis's coronation was destroyed, he directly stepped into the hypnosis trap of the Eastern Church. As a result, the strength of Arisis's will was clearly exposed in front of everyone. Without being crowned, Arisis's comprehensive combat capability was at the peak of the invincible realm in his normal state. But in terms of willpower alone, he was at most a little stronger than an ordinary invincible realm expert, and his strength was limited. This was the Saint War Angel who supported the Vatican. His willpower was not even as strong as when he died in East Island more than 3 or 4 years ago. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Aldak, the Angel of Slaughter, was in Li Tianlan's hands. Even in the current situation, Angel felt that this was a little ridiculous. She shook her head and said with a mocking look in her eyes, In fact, this is your main purpose for targeting me, isn't it? The fundamental reason why I paid the price today is not because of the series of consequences caused by me destroying the coronation. Your Majesty, the fundamental reason why you are so indifferent and Arsis is so crazy is that I destroyed his coronation. This matter itself has nothing to do with the consequences. The Pope was silent. Angel was right. Destroying Arisis's coronation itself was the biggest loss of the Vatican this time. It was so heavy that even the Pope was a little crazy. Although the Vatican gained nothing in Eastern Europe this time, it did not lose too much. It was nothing more than some elite saint warriors. Although it was distressing to lose these losses, as the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, Angel could not be treated like this. The reason why she ended up like this now was that she had overestimated Arsis. She had never thought that Arisis's will was so fragile. After destroying the coronation and being hypnotized, the will of the Pope's coronation on him would constantly backfire on Arsis. Under normal circumstances, as long as Arisis's will was firm, there would be no problem, but his will was not up to standard at all. In this way, the most intuitive consequence was that Arsis, who had lost the Pope's coronation, would have a sharp decline in his combat capability. The decline of his will also meant that Arsis was about to fall from the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he was crowned again in the future, he would no longer have the strength in his normal state. In the Battle of Eastern Europe, the Vatican had directly lost an expert at the peak of the invincible realm. That was why Arisis's performance was getting more and more abnormal. His resentment against Angel was increasing every moment. He wanted to retaliate against her and all the people related to her in the cruelest way. And the Pope chose to acquiesce in this situation. Arsis informed Tribulation of your news. The Pope changed the topic and suddenly asked, Angel, do you think he will come? Angel looked at the Pope quietly. There was no panic in her eyes. Instead, there was a very gentle smile. He will definitely come. She stubbornly held on, letting Arsis torture her body and tear her soul, just to see him again. Just one look. He will die. The Pope looked at Angel and he suddenly felt a little uneasy. Angel gave a faint, oh. The Pope took a deep breath and said blandly, You were right about what you said just now. You destroyed Arisis's coronation and made the Vatican suffer a huge loss that it had not suffered for many years, so you will end up like this. But there is one more thing, Angel, I don't like you. The Holy Virgin of the Vatican must maintain a perfect and pure virgin body. For so many years, your existence has always been a shame to me and to the Vatican. Angel laughed. Her laugh was extremely weak, but it was full of sarcasm. You don't like me? I'm the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. For so many years I think everything I do is worthy of the Vatican. Even this time my original intention is not. I understand. The Pope nodded and interrupted her. I understand too, but I just don't like you. Hating a person would not be shaken by how many good things she had done. He just didn't like her, and that was enough. Angel was silent for a while and said slowly, I understand. Actually, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. In the dark environment, her voice was ethereal and demonic, with a strong sense of depravity. I wanted to say for a long time that I don't like you, Pope, and I don't like the Vatican even more. It's only because the Vatican has my faith that I chose to stay. For the sake of faith I gave up a lot of things. But until today, until now, I understand that what I insist on is not that I can't give up, but those who have given up a long time ago, really can't give up. She leaned against the cross and looked at the Pope. Her body was covered in blood, but her expression was so solemn, as if they were meeting like this. Let me introduce myself. I'm Angel Situ. Arcis, who was next to her, gradually woke up in the Pope's spiritual domain. He heard Angel's self-introduction and her following voice. From today onwards I am a non-believer. Aricis's face suddenly twisted, and his furious roar echoed wildly in the church. The Pope's face was a little gloomy. Non-believers, after all, fall into hell. Oh. Angel chuckled. Is hell very scary? I'm in the church now, under the gaze of the Father, but in my heart, this is hell. This is arrogance. You damn. Enough. Angel suddenly interrupted Aricis's roar. She seemed to have a terminal lucidity. Her spirit was getting better, and her eyes gradually became clear and disdainful. Who do you think you are? You're a clown hiding behind the old Pope. Do you really think you're a Saint War Angel? Aricis's eyes were red, and even his hair was standing on end. All right. The Pope's light voice sounded. Angel, you've seen your end. It doesn't make sense to say anything now. He slowly turned around, walked back to the way he came, and said calmly, I said that no one can control everything. The reason why the chaos is that it is changing at any time. The general trend is changing, and so are the enemies and ourselves. We did lose the opportunity to cooperate with Li Tianlan. This is a loss in your eyes, but you don't know that after we lost Li Tianlan, we have established a cooperative relationship with the Wang family of Beihai. So in the future, Eastern Europe will still be the world of the Vatican. His figure walked to the door and paused. Arcis, he ordered in a faint and emotionless tone, destroy her. Arcis grinned hideously. Angel's body suddenly began to struggle. The sharp steel nails rubbed against her flesh, and the severe pain made her more awake. You can't destroy me. You can't do it. I can die, but I have what this clown lacks the most. Pope, you can't destroy my will. Smack. Arcis slapped Angel hard in the face. Angel no longer struggled. She suddenly laughed in a low voice. Some strange laughter echoed in the dark light. Her eyes were extremely still, like an abyss of eternal darkness. A chill gradually rose in Aricis's heart. You're all wrong. Angel said quietly, even if you unite with the Wang family of Beihai, so what? Eastern Europe will never be the world of the Vatican, and it will never be the world of the Vatican. The Pope, who was ready to leave, turned around and looked at Angel. Angel looked into his eyes as if to see into his heart. Do you know Protestantism? End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 572. It was windy and rainy. The smooth road looked extremely pale under the bright headlights. The messy heavy rain spread from the front to the far end of the site. The whole sky seemed to become chaotic with the wind and rain. In the silent car, the three women who seemed to have calmed down again were silent. Flaming Fire held the steering wheel and said nothing. Under the cold mask and black cloak, the master of Samsara Palace leaned against the seat motionlessly, as if she was asleep. There was a dim light beside the master of Samsara Palace. Qin Weibai held the notebook and read the emails carefully. Her expression was as beautiful as an oil painting. Her fingers flew lightly on the keyboard, and she handled one thing after another skillfully. The chaos was coming. The well-prepared Samsara Palace had begun to reveal its trump cards one by one. The Samsara Palace, which had been hiding in the dark, began to take action. For the Samsara Palace, the chaos that had been planned for a long time was still chaotic, but as long as the general direction was still under its control, it was acceptable. This was the power that began to be gradually exerted after the merger of more than one force. It was specific to each department of the Samsara Palace, each family, and each important figure. Everyone was moving. The notebook in front of Qin Weibai recorded everyone's specific movements and messages. Some of the messages were completely one-way. After receiving the messages, even Qin Weibai could not confirm where the messages came from for a while. She sorted out each message and then passed it to everyone in the fastest way. The cold wind whistled, the rain beat on the car window, and the sound of slender fingers tapping on the keyboard gathered together. It was like the sound of chess pieces being placed. The whole of Eastern Europe was a chessboard. This game of chess had been planned for too long. It was no exaggeration to say that since the establishment of the Samsara Palace, everything had been prepared for this moment. A large number of spies, innumerable insiders and lurking undercover agents, both on the surface and in the dark, involved in various industries and fields. Countless spies began to gather together with the dense news. No one could control everything. But under the circumstances that conditions permitted, the Samsara Palace had done everything to the extreme. In this round, the Samsara Palace didn't want to win for sure, but to not lose. The Samsara Palace was not a superpower in the dark world. Although they were strong, they had no foundation, and the lack of foundation made people unable to see their future. They were not as deep-rooted as the Wang family of Beihai, the Vatican, and even the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But it had only been a few months since the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out. No matter how steady the arrangements of the major forces were, there would always be some haste amidst the calm. But the Samsara Palace was different. In the land of Eastern Europe they had been laying out for several years. All the preparations could not be more complete. In the last time, what Qin Weibai had to do was to use the information in her hands to fix the chess pieces one by one in the final position. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. In this way, as long as the chessboard did not flip, this game would be unbreakable. A new email appeared on the computer screen. Qin Weibai glanced at it and fell silent. She stopped typing on the keyboard. After a long time she said slowly, "Tribulation is close to Mormons." The car was moving forward, passing through the wind and rain, neither fast nor slow. The master of Samsara Palace, who had been silent, suddenly moved and whispered, "The Vatican is finished." Qin Weibai waited in silence. But she waited for a long time, and the master of Samsara Palace did not speak. "That's it?" She couldn't help asking. "That's it?" The master of Samsara Palace nodded. "What will happen to tribulation?" Qin Weibai asked directly. She had known her for many years, but until now she could not accept her indifference. This kind of coldness, cruelty, or even inhumanity completely stripped away all emotions. When a person was in such a state, the world was incomparably pure, so pure that it could only accommodate one person's figure. Apart from that, beautiful, cruel, sad, inspiring, hers, his, it, and even herself, everything had nothing to do with her. The only meaning of such a life seemed to be to remember and wait. To recall the past and wait for the end. Qin Weibai did not dislike such a character. She just felt distressed. No one's life should be like this. What kind of life was this? The master of Samsara Palace fell silent. She seemed to be thinking, but it also seemed that she did not hear Qin Weibai's words. Qin Weibai suddenly felt a little powerless. Tribulation was close to Mormons. In the intelligence of the Samsara Palace, Holy Virgin Angel had been regarded as a traitor by the Vatican. It was not hard to imagine what would happen to tribulation after he left. But there was only one result for the master of Samsara Palace. The Vatican was finished. What would happen to tribulation? She did not seem to care about this question at all. If she did not care, how could she plan? "He will not die." The master of Samsara Palace's voice was like a sigh, with extremely complicated emotions. Qin Weibai once again turned a piece of intelligence into an order and sent it down. She looked at the screen, thought for a while and said, "I'm not sure." The Samsara Palace's control of Mormons had really reached the extreme. The pervasive penetration over the years could almost be said to be really everywhere. In that small city close to the Polar Ground and the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance, nothing could be hidden from the Samsara Palace. The Samsara Palace received the news as soon as the Vatican took Angel into Mormons. But at that time, all the arrangements of the Samsara Palace had begun. The master of Samsara Palace had also left Mormons. The elites of the Lin clan were still gathering. Only Lin Fengting was in Mormons. But Lin Fengting was also the most important person in the final battle. The Samsara Palace could not let him be alone. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He was going to face the Pope, Arceus, and many of the most elite saint warriors. Most importantly, according to the Samsara Palace's prediction, although Angel was in danger, it was not impossible to turn the situation around. However, the only thing that was out of the Samsara Palace's expectation was that the Vatican was too lenient and cruel to the traitors. They tried to wash away the shame with purification for the traitor Holy Virgin. But in the face of the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, who also betrayed the Vatican, they were too lenient. Mellad betrayed the Vatican, but he also established cooperation with the Vatican. The Pope was too decisive in this matter. He did not even hesitate at all. He was so fast that the Samsara Palace could not operate anything at all. In this way, not only Angel, but also the possibility of tribulation surviving was infinitely reduced. Qin Weibai subconsciously glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire drove quietly at a moderate speed. She shook her head and said, "It's too late." "Is that the only way?" Qin Weibai looked out of the window and muttered to herself, "That's the best." The master of Samsara Palace said indifferently, "After the trial day, the Vatican failed to plot against the 5 countries in Eastern Europe and has begun to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai. There is little information in this regard. We can't determine to what extent their cooperation with the Wang family of Beihai has reached. But in the final battle they will not be our friends. In this case, it is better to let them withdraw in advance." "Is this an exchange?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. The master of Samsara Palace was silent for a while and said faintly, "It's worth it." In her eyes there was no such concept as whether it was cruel or not, only whether it was worth it or not. Qin Weibai looked at the master of Samsara Palace quietly for a long time. "I can understand your thoughts," she said slowly and softly, "but have you ever thought about what Tianlan will do if he knows that tribulation has gone to Mormons?" "I'm mentally prepared." The master of Samsara Palace's voice was dull. "If he appears on the battlefield, I'll come." She paused and continued, "And he may not necessarily go. The Snowdance Corps will not play a role in this final battle." Qin Weibai thought of the news that came not long ago. The Snowdance Corps, which was gathered in the parade square of Reki City, was defeated by Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong. While the banquet in Reki City was still going on, President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State and commander of the Snowdance Corps, Li Tianlan, had already rushed to the office of the president. Qin Weibai frowned. "Can't Li Huaqing persuade Wang Tianzong? Have you ever seen a real chosen one?" The master of Samsara Palace suddenly asked. Qin Weibai was stunned and shook her head subconsciously. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look in the direction of Reki City and muttered to herself, "He's coming soon." She looked through the window. Outside the window there was only heavy rain. The rain was like black ink covering the sky. It was so cold and so desperate. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 573. Only by witnessing it with his own eyes could he understand how shocking the sword move of the strongest swordsman in the world was. The military parade square of Reki City was extremely wide. Within a radius of thousands of meters, the dense broken raindrops, which were like crystal grains, were quietly and strangely suspended in the air. The sword intent extended from the broken raindrops, stretching the crystals one by one. The lights in the square refracted colorful light in the suspended crystal grains. The whole square became hazy and blurred. The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps froze there one after another, looking like dead things. The military parade square had been completely cordoned off. The military of Wulan State blocked the 2 blocks around the square. On the steps around the square, in front of a blurred and dangerous light, Li Tianlan quietly looked at a soldier of the Snowdance Corps who was closest to him. The halo was spreading, the raindrops were breaking, the sword energy was extending, and the danger was spreading. In his sight, the soldier of the Snowdance Corps was very close to him, but everything in front of him became extremely blurred. Vaguely, Li Tianlan could see that the other party's eyes were trying to move. Obviously, this sword move imprisoned his body, but it could not imprison his mind. Li Tianlan's palm moved, and then he fell silent again. "How is it?" Li Huaqing stood beside Li Tianlan and asked in a gloomy tone. His expression was solemn, but his eyes were extremely cold. When he received the news here, Li Huaqing was still immersed in the joy of signing the contract with Wulan State. As a result, tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were imprisoned by a sword move, and it was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State who did it. How could such news be blocked? Now, perhaps the whole world knew that the Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong had attacked the Snowdance Corps. Such behavior was tantamount to openly stepping on Li Huaqing's bottom line. No matter how he looked at it, Wang Tianzong had gone too far. Chi-Chi's first appearance, Li Tianlan shook his head and said calmly, "There's no way." In Eastern Europe there were few times when he was powerless. But in the face of Wang Tianzong's sword move, he really had no way at all. His sword intent was perfect, but he didn't have enough sword energy to support it. Even if there was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who practiced the same martial arts as him and was willing to lend him his sword energy, Li Tianlan couldn't break this sword. The Wang Tianzong who wielded this sword was completely different from the Wang Tianzong on the night of the trial day. It could almost be said to be at another level. Now that this sword was here, unless Wang Tianzong wanted to withdraw the sword energy or wait for the sword energy to disappear by itself, no one in the entire dark world could do anything to this sword. Li Huaqing slowly turned around and looked at the light curtain flashing with different colors in front of him. The blurred figures of countless soldiers of the Snowdance Corps were constantly shaking in the light curtain. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Li Huaqing could clearly feel their struggle in silence and stiffness. A surge of anger rushed to the top of his head. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and suddenly opened his mouth. His loud and clear voice directly rushed through the broken curtain of rain. "Wang Tianzong, come out." The broken curtain of rain trembled slightly. A drop of rain that had been stretched by the sword chi slowly fell. In the slight sound of footsteps, Wang Tianzong's figure seemed to come out of the rain. He looked at Li Huaqing and then at Li Tianlan without saying anything. Li Tianlan didn't say anything either. There was no Wang Tianzong in front of him. The so-called image was just a stream of sword energy, but it was extremely real. "Tianzong, what's going on?" Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and his voice grew gloomier. "They need to stay here for a few days." Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. He looked straight into Li Huaqing's eyes and didn't give in at all. "What's the reason?" "There's no reason." Li Huaqing's eyes almost narrowed into a line. "No reason?" He nodded and suddenly became furious. "If there's no reason, why do you imprison them here? Do you know that these are the most elite corps of Zhongzhou State and also the corps that have made great contributions to Zhongzhou State? Wang Tianzong, what do you want to do? Beihai Province is still a province of Zhongzhou State. Have you considered their position when you do this?" Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became cold. He nodded and said, "I'm doing this because my position hasn't changed. Mr. President, you're right. They're the most elite corps in Zhongzhou State. As a Zhongzhou citizen, I have the obligation to protect them. This is the last battle, and they shouldn't be sacrificed in vain in such a battle. I left them here for the survival of the entire Snowdance Corps." "The last battle?" Li Huaqing paused slightly and said in a low voice, "What do you mean?" Wang Tianzong didn't answer. He glanced at Li Tianlan calmly and said meaningfully, "Tribulation went to Mormons." Li Tianlan's face suddenly changed. At the same time his cell phone suddenly rang. Li Tianlan took out his cell phone. It was Situ Tsanyue's phone number. Pale lightning flashed across the night sky of Reki City. Li Tianlan answered the phone. In the messy wind and rain, in the rainy season of Eastern Europe, an unprecedented thunder suddenly shook between heaven and earth. In the lightning and thunder, Li Tianlan, who was holding the phone, turned livid in an instant. The thunder gradually passed. The heavy rain poured down. When the rainy season was about to end, an incomparably wild heavy rain swept through all of Eastern Europe. Lightning raged in the air. Li Tianlan silently put down the phone. The image of Wang Tianzong condensed by the sword energy had disappeared. Li Tianlan looked in the direction of Wang Tianzong across the square and was silent for a long time. In the room with the lights on, Wang Tianzong, who was dressed in a wide robe with big sleeves of the Han costume, was also looking in Li Tianlan's direction with a writing brush in his hand. He watched Li Tianlan narrow his eyes, watch him remain silent, and watch him turn around and leave. "Where are you going?" Li Huaqing's voice sounded. Li Tianlan didn't look back and said calmly, "Mormons?" Wang Tianzong laughed. At this moment he didn't know if Li Tianlan understood, but he had already understood. These were not his plants. At his current height he no longer needed any plants. Li Tianlan was indeed tricky, but as long as he wanted to, he could solve it in the simplest way. When the Snowdance Corps was imprisoned here, in the vast Eastern Europe, Reki City, Wulan State, there was no young marshal. On the final battlefield, Li Tianlan was just Li Tianlan. That was all. Over the manor of Mormons, the wind and rain suddenly became heavier. The polar night was getting darker. Inside and outside the manor, the hazy fog seemed to have broken free from its shackles and began to fill every corner. The white fog, which represented rich vitality, flowed slowly and lingered in every flower and leaf in the manor. It gathered and did not disperse, looking beautiful and mysterious. The deep black and white fog of the polar night slowly intertwined. Lin Fengting silently walked in the garden, carefully looking at the grass and trees in front of him. His movements were very slow, and his eyes were focused on every flower in his line of sight. Such a serious posture gave people the feeling that he wasn't looking at the flowers at all, but was looking for something. An old voice sounded behind him and he was a little confused. "What are you doing, sir?" Behind Lin Fengting, the 13th Supermaster of Samsara Palace, Xian Xuanzi, the metaphysics grandmaster of Zhongzhou State with the code name Tianji, held an umbrella with a puzzled look in his eyes. He had used a mortal fate to connect Li Tianlan's dragon vein with Qin Weibai, and their vitality was closely connected. Now it was time to have a result, so he naturally had to come and see. But he did not know what Lin Fengting was looking for here at this time. Lin Fengting walked slowly as if he did not hear Xian Xuanzi's voice. Xian Xuanzi hesitated for a moment and followed Lin Fengting with an umbrella, carefully observing the white fog condensed by fate around him. The frantic raindrops pattered on the pitch-black surface of the umbrella. The flowers and plants shook, the thunder roared, the lightning flashed, the wind howled, and the rain fell. It was noisy. In a trance, Lin Fengting's very soft and low voice sounded, with trance and unreality. "Master, do you think there will be two flowers that are exactly the same in such a big garden?" Xian Xuanzi was stunned for a moment. There would not be two leaves, two flowers, or two people that were exactly the same in the world. He glanced at Lin Fengting and said with a smile, "Maybe there will be similar ones." "No." Lin Fengting's voice was a little persistent. "I mean exactly the same. How is that possible?" Xian Xuanzi smiled and shook his head. "I thought it was impossible before, but why is it impossible?" Lin Fengting muttered to himself and shook his head. Xian Xuanzi suddenly felt a little uneasy. His eyes focused and looked at Lin Fengting. "What do you mean, sir?" "Boring." Lin Fengting shook his head. "These?" He pointed to the vast fog ahead. "Such strong fate, such strong vitality, who did you give it to?" "To the boss, of course." Xian Xuanzi's tone was indifferent. Lin Fengting laughed. His smile was complicated and absurd. "Who is your boss?" Xian Xuanzi looked at him with even more absurd eyes. He asked, "Who else can it be except Qin Weibai?" "Yes." Lin Fengting whispered, "Who else can it be except Qin Weibai?" In the wind and rain he smiled bitterly. "But the question is, who is Qin Weibai?" In the dark church, in the almost frozen atmosphere, blood was still flowing. The smell of blood seemed to have a strange fragrance, and the smell that represented sin and desire had begun to fade away. The Pope, who was about to leave, walked back step by step. Angel looked at him and her calm eyes were like ice and snow. "What is the new stream?" The Pope stared into Angel's eyes and asked seriously, "You don't know the new stream?" Angel tilted her head and looked at the Pope. Her voice was hoarse with strange emotions. The Pope said nothing. Of course he knew the new stream. In the traditional sense, the new stream was also a sect that believed in God. In the eyes of ordinary people, there was no difference between the Vatican, the Eastern Church, and the new stream. But because of their different interpretations of the same faith, they were strangers to each other and even regarded each other as heretics. The Vatican was powerful. It was entrenched in Eastern Europe and spread all over the world. The Eastern Church was also deeply rooted in Eastern Europe. The new stream was a force that had only risen in recent years. It had no clear diocese, scattered personnel, and insufficient foundation. It was mainly distributed in Southeast Asia. This kind of sect without foundation was not worthy of the Vatican's attention. But the new stream really had a large number of people, and in the chaotic area of Southeast Asia, it was very easy to cultivate fanatics. So the new stream had developed very fast in recent years and had vaguely become the third force besides the Vatican and the Eastern Church. But at this moment, the Pope was not sure if the Protestantism that Angel was talking about was the Protestantism that she knew. "You joined the new stream?" The Pope's voice suddenly became extremely cold. "I didn't join the new stream." Angel's voice became more and more difficult. "I said that before today, I had a clear conscience about the Vatican." The Pope looked at Angel coldly and did not speak. "I didn't join it, but it doesn't mean that I haven't been in contact with the new stream. I am the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. The new stream is developing very fast. I very much hope to absorb the new stream, let the new stream accept our ideas, and then become our new diocese. Did you see the Pope of the new stream? The Pope suddenly asked. No. Angel shook her head. I didn't see the Pope. She smiled. But I saw the Holy Virgin of the new stream whose status is even higher than the Pope. She said quietly, but the Pope's body suddenly became extremely cold. It was raining heavily. The conversation between Angel and the Pope came to an end. The conversation between Mellad and the mysterious Majesty also came to an end. There was silence at the end. Listening to Angel's encounter, His Majesty did not speak for a long time. Mellad waited quietly. But the longer he waited, the more he felt that something was wrong. You mean that Arsis arranged a lot of confidants for Angel? // to be exact, there are 16. Mellad said seriously. That is to say, Angel had 16 men overnight? His Majesty's voice was very cold. Then he sneered. Do you think it's possible? Mellad seriously thought about the situation at that time. From his standpoint, he really wanted to see such a hot scene where the saint warriors insulted the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Therefore he paid special attention to this matter. He carefully recalled and confirmed again, that's the truth. Bullshit. His Majesty suddenly scolded angrily, with Angel's character, purity is her bottom line. She only has tribulation in her heart. Tell me, under what circumstances would she let more than 10 men insult her? Mellad was silent for a while and tentatively said, when she can't resist. His Majesty was not amused by his dry humor. He thought slowly and said, it's impossible for Angel to have no room to resist. There's something wrong with this matter. It's impossible? His voice was silent for a while and he suddenly asked, how many times has Angel been in contact with the Samsara Palace? As far as I know, there was only one time in the Holy Land. Mellad said, that night I saw Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. Angel was also there. His Majesty said, did Lin Fengting attack you that night? Yes. Mellad nodded. You were unscathed? His Majesty's voice became more and more gloomy. Yes. Mellad still nodded. Lin Fengting is just SOSO. Although his sword is strong, it's very slow. It's too slow. His Majesty's voice suddenly rose. It's so slow that you don't know how many things you've missed. He took a few rapid breaths and said coldly, didn't you notice the time after it was over? How long did it take for Lin Fengting to attack with that sword? 10 minutes? Or half an hour? Mellad opened his mouth, but his heart suddenly sank. He didn't know how long it took for Lin Fengting to attack with that sword that night. He didn't know if he had noticed the time. At this moment, he tried hard to recall, and suddenly found that he had no impression of the time that night at all. The wind and rain filled the sky. His Majesty hung up the phone. Under the gloomy polar night, the roar of the engine with a crazy meaning sounded faintly. The bright headlights rushed over like two raging tides and rushed straight to the church. The sky was full of killing. At the same time, the atmosphere in the church hall had completely frozen. The Pope regained his indifference. Angel? There was a sigh in his voice. Angel suddenly raised her head and looked at him. My name is Situ. She laughed softly. In an instant, all the Pope could see was Angel's figure. Her figure was so tall, so clear, and so beautiful that it almost occupied the whole world. The Pope was at a loss for a moment and suddenly woke up. This was an absolutely pure spiritual domain. This was the transcendent realm. The Pope suddenly retreated, and his voice became extremely high as he retreated. Kill her. The sound of a heavy object falling to the ground rang out without warning. Before Arsis came back to his senses, around him, one after another, the saint warriors who had once insulted Angel with a grim smile had fallen silently. The hall of the church was still extremely dark. But the light was changing slightly. In a trance, Angel, whose limbs were nailed to the cross, was bleeding. But the smell that was full of desire was moving away. Her body was no longer naked. The torn white dress reappeared on her body, extremely clean and tidy. Arisis's eyes widened in disbelief. Was everything just an illusion? How was it possible? Angel, who was wearing a white dress and bleeding, slowly opened her eyes. Dress. She looked at Arsis, and there was undisguised arrogance in her tone. I said that you are a clown, and I have the will and spirit that you lack the most. How dare you insult me? Arisis's huge body suddenly trembled. Extreme anger swallowed all his reason in an instant. The whole night, all the scenes, the cruel revenge, the desperate struggles and wailing, were all the scenes he had imagined. Now Angel's dress was neat and tidy. When the illusion disappeared, she was so arrogant. You, Arisis's fingers kept trembling. Angel glanced at Arsis coldly. Arisis's face was angry and resentful. In Angel's spiritual domain he didn't feel anything strange, but Angel spat out a mouthful of blood directly. At the same time, the Pope's aura also quickly weakened. The Pope's figure began to retreat quickly in the darkness, but his order did not change. Arsis, kill her. Angel laughed. Outside the church, the wild and galloping vehicle crashed into the church. In the polar night sky, there was a fire burning in the continuous heavy rain. Angel's body straightened up and she said calmly, "Everything you did tonight is blasphemy. You are guilty." Chapter 574. The Pope quickly stepped back. He had been standing on the altar all his life, controlling people's hearts, and his words were law. Could be said that he was extremely brilliant. But at this moment he felt an unprecedented danger. This was a feeling that the Pope had almost forgotten. From the above-board political circles of various countries to the dark and bloody dark world, he was ambitious, bold, invincible, and domineering. But he never felt that anyone could threaten him. He really didn't understand martial arts, not at all. But in the spiritual field, he was truly invincible and no one could kill him. But at this moment, the omen of death was so clear. It was like a dark shadow was crazily spreading over. The surrounding space was collapsing and the earth was cracking. Stars were falling and light was disappearing. Deathly silence and coldness spread over with an almost eternal darkness, swallowing everything like an abyss. Countless scenes kept changing in front of him and finally returned to reality. The reality was Angel's eyes, so beautiful that they occupied everything. The transcendent realm. At this moment, the Pope could finally be completely convinced that in his invincible spiritual field, there was now an opponent who could compete with him. The traitor of the Vatican, the Holy Virgin Angel, had also entered the transcendent realm. How was this possible? The Pope only felt that everything that had happened today was extremely absurd. Everything that Angel had experienced, all the insults and the sinful desires, were all illusions. But when he was unprepared, even he was deceived. A faintly discernible sense of panic gradually took over his consciousness. The Pope's retreating figure suddenly stopped. In an instant, his pupils condensed and shrank, and there was a pure and flawless silvery white color between his eyes. This was the most powerful and perfect will in the entire dark world. It was like a vast galaxy, like a surging sea. With a huge oppressive will, it followed the Pope's gaze and went straight into Angel's eyes. It was irresistible. Arsis, kill her. The Pope's deep voice sounded, incomparably majestic. Angel was motionless, but her spirit was more active than ever. The Pope's eyes were silvery white and his eyes were shining. The clear softness in Angel's eyes gradually faded, became dark and became silent. The two of them looked at each other. The same perfect will instantly met. At that moment, the Pope did not feel any ordinary emotion in Angel's will. It was darkness. Deathly silence, coldness, numbness, madness, and incomparable despair. The Pope suddenly opened his eyes wide. In this darkness he finally saw the truth. He knew Angel's mental state very well. With her temperament, it was impossible for her to enter the transcendent realm for the rest of her life. Even at her peak, there was still a long way to go before she could enter the transcendent realm. After encountering tribulation, her mental state had been unstable. It was already good enough that she had not regressed. It was impossible for her to continue to improve. From saintess to rebellion to being purified, all the experiences might stimulate Angel's will, but it was impossible for her to break through to this level. There was no traditional realm in the spiritual domain. The transcendent realm was the only realm. There was a natural moat between this realm and the upper and lower realms. It was even more exaggerated than martial arts. To some extent, Angel had no room for improvement. But at this time, the willpower and spirit displayed by Angel were indeed in the transcendent realm. That vast yet incomparably condensed will was so dark, so despairing. This was not Angel's state of mind at all. Naturally, it was not Angel's will. The darkness was like a tide. With a madness and malice that almost buried the entire era, it swallowed the Pope in an instant. The whole church was completely boiling in the silent wind and rain. Like a mad bull, a vehicle soared into the air and crashed into the front door of the church. The harsh alarm and the angry roar sounded at the same time. The polar night was silent. The heavy rain fell. The fierce wind all over the sky stopped for a moment. A figure that was not very tall appeared in the air like a shadow. He raised a palm. All the airflow around him stopped in an instant. As the most elite force of the Holy Disarmament Corps, countless Saint warriors reacted immediately. A Saint warrior in heavy armor, who was obviously ready for battle in advance, suddenly rose into the air and shouted, "Who is it?" The stagnant ice wind shook slightly. In the silence, the body of the Saint warrior who had rushed into the sky shattered silently. At this moment, it seemed that countless sharp blades had split his body. The broken pieces of flesh and blood spilled down and fell to the ground with a dull sound. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. This picture was so clear and cruel that the Holy Disarmament Corps, which was full of fighting intent, was silent for a moment. Everyone stared at the thin figure in the air, who was not tall and could even be said to be slightly short. Black tights and silver mask. He stood there without any emotion that a human should have. In a trance he was like a knife, sharp enough to split everything. After a moment of silence, the figure standing in the air seemed to glance at the Holy Disarmament Corps below. A hoarse and deep voice sounded, with extreme indifference. "Zhongzhou State Situ Wanjia. Where is Arsis?" Countless curses filled with anger and murderous intent suddenly rang out. "How dare you? Heresy, kill him. He should be purified. Guilty. This is blasphemy. Damn it." Amidst countless curses and roars, Tribulation stared ahead quietly. It was raining cats and dogs. In the deep night, it took him several hours to drive across a distance of nearly 1,000 miles. Tribulation's body was a little tired, but his whole soul was burning. He didn't flinch or hesitate. In the air, he took a step forward and whispered, "I'm here to pick you up." The stagnant night wind began to surge as he moved forward. Between heaven and earth, the gale from all directions continued to gather around Tribulation's body. He moved forward slowly. Countless of the most elite Saint warriors around rushed forward without hesitation. The violent airflow had formed a visible tornado around Tribulation. The space was constantly shaking because of the hurricane. Tribulation glanced down. There was no emotion in his eyes. The gale burst. The wind, which had been condensed to the extreme, burst like a knife, and kept flying with the chilling, killing intent. The shrill sound of the wind kept reverberating, getting louder and louder. The airflow that kept exploding came in wisps, and each wisp carried a fatal edge. Between heaven and earth, the killing intent soared to the sky. In the corner of the church, Mellad had already stood up. Tribulation's figure slowly moved forward in the air. Countless Saint warriors rose into the air and then fell. Blood, broken limbs, and minced flesh spread all the way with death. "How is it possible?" Mellad's eyes were extremely solemn. "How can he be so strong?" At this moment, in his eyes, Tribulation was the incarnation of death. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, Mellad could roughly see Tribulation's current state. Tribulation was not in a good state. His injury had not healed. At this moment, every time he moved with all his strength, his body might completely collapse. Moreover, his breakthrough was too fierce, so it was not perfect. Obviously, he had not solved this problem in the past few years. But it was more obvious that Tribulation had obviously stopped thinking about it. If he couldn't solve the problem, he wouldn't solve it. Now, Tribulation no longer considered any consequences. There was only killing in his heart. Mellad's body trembled slightly, and there was obvious hesitation and struggle in his eyes. In this state, Tribulation would definitely not be able to withstand one attack from him. Mellad was sure that as long as he appeared in front of him, he could beat Tribulation into a bloody mess with just one punch. Not to mention him, any ordinary Invincible Realm expert, even a half-step Invincible Realm expert, or even a peak of the Thundershocking Realm expert could kill Tribulation with a full blow. But similarly, any Invincible Realm expert, close to the peak of the Invincible Realm, or even at the peak of the Invincible Realm, would not be able to withstand a blow from Tribulation. In this state, anyone was qualified to bet life and death with Tribulation, but he was also qualified to bet life and death with anyone. His body was extremely fragile, but at this moment, the sharpness he showed had far exceeded that of an ordinary Invincible Realm expert. Instead, he had steadily entered the peak of the Invincible Realm. This was Tribulation in his normal state. There were no injuries or hidden dangers. As the strongest assassin in the dark world, this was his own sharpness. I told you, don't underestimate Tribulation. His Majesty's voice sounded in the phone, extremely low. And why do you look down on him? What's the concept of breaking the existing martial arts and entering the invincible realm when he is in the chi-controlling realm? This proves that since the 4 realms of martial arts, his chi-controlling realm is the most perfect. In terms of the chi-controlling realm alone, he is even more perfect than the Chosen One. Who dares to look down on such a monster? His breakthrough is so fierce that he can't exert all his strength at all. But if he doesn't care about anything, who can stop him in front of us? This is a peak assassin who can gamble with the life and death of an expert in the peak of the invincible realm. His Majesty's voice was a little emotional. The Vatican is finished. Mellad hesitated for a moment. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Stop him. His Majesty's voice suddenly became extremely cold. At least hold him back. Angel must die. I can't hold him back. Mellad smiled bitterly without hesitation. It was easy to kill such a tribulation, and it was also easy to be killed by him. But it was not easy to hold him back. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven. The will that represented the darkness surged wildly. Time was going back in a hurry. Angel looked at the Pope in front of her. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the Holy Land more than a month ago, to that night in the hotel in the Holy Land. In the hotel room, Mellad stood beside her. In front of them were Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. The hidden patriarch of the Lin clan began to draw his sword. The sharpness of the sword was so strong that everyone ignored everything else. The memory that seemed to have been sealed and deliberately forgotten appeared in her mind, becoming clearer and clearer. A voice sounded in her ear. Are you Tribulation's woman? Angel was shocked. In the room, Lin Fengting's sword was still moving forward. Its sharpness was at its peak, but its speed was getting slower and slower. Everything was like a completely frozen oil painting. Only her thoughts were still normal. Who are you? She looked at Qin Weibai and asked with vigilance in her eyes. I'm Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai said something nonsense. Angel became more and more vigilant. She was a little uneasy and subconsciously wanted to retreat. You should see this. Qin Weibai stretched out her palm. Suddenly, the whole world compressed toward her as she raised her palm. The surroundings were getting smaller and the world was getting smaller. The room was constantly shrinking, completely imprisoning her in place. The opponent's will was extremely tyrannical, suppressing her in place. A hazy light appeared in Qin Weibai's palm. The light was dense and colorful, like a dream. Angel desperately wanted to look away, but her body was out of control. Her eyes were fixed on the light in front of her. The light flowed slowly, like the joys and sorrows of partings and reunions, flashing one scene after another. It was like the secular world, containing the epitome of an era, and also like martial arts. There was sword chi roaring and growing. The 6 paths of reincarnation broke out to the extreme and destroyed everything. The 10 skills of true martial arts blocked all directions, leaving no grass in the unique domain. The 24 moves of sword shattered the sky and tore the world apart. The starry sky was vast and the shadows were flowing. Ice, wind, thunder, and fire were constantly changing. This was everything. What she wanted to see, she could see in it. Angel was extremely scared, as if she had seen the legendary Pandora's box. She knew what it meant. This was the embodiment of a strong will that was infinitely close to the extreme. The transcendent realm. In front of this light, her thoughts were extremely vague but also extremely clear. Are you in the transcendent realm? Not yet. Qin Weibai stared at the light in her palm and she was also in a daze. No one knew what she saw in this light. But it's very close. What do you want? Angel stepped back in vain, and her voice was gradually changing because of fear. I want to lend it to you for a while. Qin Weibai said faintly. I don't want this kind of thing. Angel almost screamed. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. It's very likely to save your life. It's not a bad thing for you. Qin Weibai smiled gently and softly. What the hell is this? Angel asked in a trembling voice. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time and then she whispered, This is a sword light. The epitome in the sword light is an era that belongs to women, an era of revenge, the most boring era. All the memories began to become clearer and clearer. Angel thought of every expression of Qin Weibai at that time. At that time, she saw the light expanding in the other party's palm. The light was getting brighter and brighter, but she could only feel darkness. That was endless despair. The will belonging to the Pope rushed into her spiritual domain with great arrogance and determination. The Pope's pupils were contracting. But Angel's pupils were expanding. The sword light that condensed the entire era shone in her eyes. It was so fierce and so lonely. Vaguely, she remembered that she asked again at that time, "What the hell is this?" Qin Weibai's answer seemed equally clear at this time. The heart of despair. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 575. The most gorgeous light spread in her consciousness with the purest darkness. The light in Angel's pupils faded away quickly, becoming dimmer and dimmer. However, the sword light named Despair Heart continued to soar in her sight. Her spiritual realm and the sword light merged into one, completely stabilizing in the transcendent realm. Countless pictures kept flowing. Vitality slowly passed in Angel's body. The Pope's body began to tremble obviously. The colorful sword light appeared in his consciousness with countless pictures without warning. The pictures began to flash quickly like a dream. Someone set off a gust of wind in the depressed deep sea. Someone gathered rainwater in the dry desert. Someone flicked his fingers and lit fire in the ice and snow, evaporating the glacier. Thunder rose between day and night, and the power of heaven fell. Someone climbed to the sky and reached the clouds. In the brightly lit city, thousands of people bowed their heads. Under the attention of the whole world, someone took over the divine sword. The tide slapped against the cliff. In front of the boulder engraved with names, someone was saying something to him. In the tide that sounded like thunder, he looked into the distance. The afterglow of the setting sun shone down, and the quiet and free couple was walking away. In the attic in the ice and snow, the girl was practicing one movement after another. The serious-looking woman corrected her every expression harshly. Smiling, raising her hand, walking steps and swinging her waist. A golden dog appeared in the solemn and quiet airport. The heaven and earth suddenly shattered into a fist and fell down. He walked into the spacious and solemn conference room. The giant standing at the peak of power stood up at the same time. He waved his hand casually and sat down directly opposite the main seat. At the grand military parade, the most elite troops shouted, "Invincible," with fanatical expressions. One after another, the Invincible Realm experts who were powerful in the dark world bent down in embarrassment. He appeared in one picture after another. The solemn meeting, the warm banquet, and the fierce battle. The prosperous, the barren, the mountains, the rivers, the lakes, the seas, and the bustling cities in the human world. He walked over naturally and everything was under his feet. The sword energy flowing with colorful light shone the night sky. After the sword light, the world was vast. There was heavy snow in front of the Pope. The wind and snow were messy and countless drops of blood fell. Tens of thousands of images erupted at the same time, almost shattering all of his consciousness. The colorful sword light whistled in the wind and snow. The murderous weapon opened fire at all costs. The bright sword light pierced forward with an incomparably decisive killing intent. In the bustling city at the highest place, a beauty in a red dress lightly jumped down. The sword intent, which seemed to be infinite reincarnation and also seemed to be exploding to the limit, filled the sky, and the colorful sword light was burning. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Facing everything, he advanced courageously in the sky full of starlight. The black waves swept up to the sky, and the huge stone engraved with glory shattered. The figure fell powerlessly into the deep sea, and the perfect figure fell from the sky. Flowers withered, trees were crushed, and the water was turbid. On the other side of the barren mountain where all the palaces had collapsed, a warm hand held a boy's hand as they walked through the wind and snow. His figure was elegant, but his voice was a little lonely. "Grandpa Lin, I want revenge." "What hatred? From today onwards it was all over. They've repaid what they owed you." Ah. The Pope suddenly hugged his head with both hands and roared. 2 lines of blood shot out from his eyes. His face was twisted and pale. Countless images continued to appear in his consciousness. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of them. The cherry blossoms of North Island, Tribulation, and Angel, who were still young, appeared in his consciousness. Countless people's lives and endings flooded into his mind like a tide, and finally turned into a flame, burning his will, faith, and even soul. The vitality in Angel's eyes was getting fainter and fainter. The Pope struggled to raise his hand. In front of Angel, Arcis held a slender samurai sword and directly pierced Angel's chest. All of Angel's vitality began to break under this sword. There was no future anymore. This was real despair. She closed her eyes, and all her will began to burn like never before, as if she was going to destroy everything. A mouthful of blood sprayed directly from the Pope's mouth. His aura quickly weakened, and even his raised palm began to tremble violently. He gasped hard and his voice was rapid and hoarse. "Purify, purify this heretic." The wind and rain were like knives. Outside the church, it was completely a hell-like charaba. Tribulation's figure moved straight forward in the air. One shadow after another began to condense around him. He was walking and so was the shadow. The extremely cold and cruel killing intent was surging and boiling like a raging tide. Countless people in the Saint Warriors stepped on the air and flew up. Tribulation was moving. The shadow was also moving. The shadow, which perfectly replicated all of Tribulation's movements, was a machine specially designed for killing and survival. The strong wind and heavy rain rotated around the shadow as cold as a blade. The raging fire went out. The thunder disappeared. The thick ice wall turned into powder in an instant. Blood flowed down. The broken bodies and pieces of flesh kept splashing. Tribulation's face was expressionless. It seemed that he had never been like this in his life. He moved forward seriously, killed, and was so focused. "Everyone, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page." In front of him they were both non-entities and opponents. Ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm, peak of thunder-shocking realm, and even half-step invincible realm. Tribulation went all out to deal with every opponent. One blow. Only one blow. No matter who stood in front of him, he was turned into flying pieces. Flesh and blood. It was calm, but it moved forward with indomitable will. More and more Saint Warriors gathered, but fewer and fewer of them attacked. The Saint Warriors began to retreat. And Mellad's figure finally walked over from the corner of the church with difficulty. Before today, Mellad had never thought that he would be afraid of anyone. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he would not be afraid of any battle under any circumstances. After all, even if he was not an opponent, he could leave the battlefield calmly. But at this moment, in the face of tribulation, although he did not want to admit it, he had to face the fear in his heart. This fear was so strong that every step he took was incomparably difficult. This was the opponent that Mellad was most unwilling to face. Such a tribulation. In front of him, this was not a battle at all. It was a gamble with his life. His Majesty asked him to hold the other party back. But he couldn't hold him back at all. No one could stop tribulation in this state. Such a battle was really a moment of life and death. Bang! There seemed to be something breaking in the church in front of him. An incomparably weak but extremely sharp voice rang out. It was Angel's voice. "You will all be buried with me." In midair, Tribulation suddenly raised his head. The shadows around him raised their heads at the same time. The wind and rain paused slightly in the air. The sharpness that was enough to tear the night sky suddenly burst out. Tribulation reached out his hand, and the shadows around him made their moves at the same time. The wind and rain hovering in front of him gathered together at the moment he made his move. With a push of his hand, it turned into a hazy arc of light. The water rippled. The next second, blood bloomed. Mellad suddenly gritted his teeth. His body rushed up into the sky with countless residual shadows. Like a bolt of lightning, he pounced on Tribulation. The moment when it seemed to become extremely fast and then extremely slow, Tribulation glanced at him. His eyes were extremely calm, without any emotion or life or death. He put his palm up. The black shadows around him dissipated. A sharp sword chime filled with killing intent suddenly sounded between heaven and earth. With the vast heaven and earth as the sheath. With the wind and rain all over the sky as the sword. Without dodging, Tribulation stared at Mellad. His arm fell and he directly slashed with his sword. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. That you're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.